Holding the bone spear, Han Hao sensed the faint ripples at the bottom of the sea. He concealed all the aura on his body and quickly flew at the bottom of the sea. In the sky above the sea, Salus, who was standing proudly, suddenly chuckled and said to himself, "It's really here!" Just as he was about to dive into the sea, Salus suddenly realized that his divine soul seemed to have lost track of the other party. The soul power that he had sent into the sea was also rapidly losing its sense of intuition. With a cold snort, Salus's eyes flickered with electric light like slithering snakes. His majestic body suddenly flew to the bottom of the sea. Following the soul power at the bottom of the sea, he chased after the rapidly disappearing target. Even though he was in the depths of the sea, Salus's speed wasn't affected at all. He plunged straight to the bottom of the sea like a rainbow piercing the sun. The sense of crisis that followed him like a shadow made Han Hao realize the identity of the person who was approaching him. He didn't dare to be careless. He utilized the special divine energy in his body and used all his strength to flee from that powerful enemy. At the bottom of the sea, one party was fleeing with all his strength, while the other was chasing with all his strength. Half a day later, Han Hao flew out from the bottom of the sea and came to a mountain range full of dense forests. He gave up on fleeing, but stood behind a big tree with the bone spear in his hand. He seemed to be waiting for something. A few minutes later, a bolt of lightning appeared out of thin air. Salus's enormous figure slowly took shape in the lightning. He coldly gazed at the motionless Han Hao and said in a deep voice, "A young hero indeed. I did not expect that the one who killed Ansaik would be you. Han Hao, you have become more and more unbridled in the fringe for the past 2 years. You even dared to touch my people." The little skull, Han Hao, lowered his head and did not utter a word. He only tightly clenched the bone spear in his hand. "Han Hao, I will give you a choice. As long as you are willing to submit to me, I will spare your life," shouted Salus coldly. All these years, Han Hao had done a lot of great things in the fringe. Even Salus had heard of him. The fact that Han Hao was able to kill Ansaik, a late-stage high god, was enough to prove how terrifying this youngster was. This was exactly the kind of talent that Salus needed the most. Therefore, even Salus, who was always protective of Han Hao, was tempted by Han Hao's talent. Han Hao raised his head and looked indifferently at Salus. He said in an indifferent tone, "Let's do it." Other than Han Shaw, who made him, Han Hao would not submit to anyone. Even in the God-Hunter Alliance, he, Han Hao, was a loner. He was not bound by anyone. "What a pity," sighed Salus. An enormous thunderbolt ball descended from the sky and headed straight for Han Hao. For an ordinary god, it was impossible to alter their divine soul. The soul imprint was the source of their existence. Only when they made a breakthrough to a new realm would they experience some minor changes. However, it was impossible to alter the soul imprint by relying on one's own strength, or using some other method. It was precisely because Salus knew this that he left a special imprint on Ansaik so that Han Hao could sense the soul imprint of the one who killed Ansaik. It was difficult to alter the soul imprint of a god in this world, but Han Hao's life form was special and he also cultivated demonic arts. For him, this wasn't a problem. There was a kind of demonic secret technique that could alter his soul imprint. He had been silently comprehending this demonic secret technique since he was underground and experimenting with it while being chased by Salus. Finally, when Salus's thunderbolt ball came crashing down, Han Hao successfully cultivated that secret technique and altered his soul imprint. But he knew that even if his soul imprint was altered, he was temporarily no match for Salus. Therefore, he decisively used the demonic blood disassembly art to escape. Thousands of miles away, in a cave, Han Hao was dripping with blood. He was sitting cross-legged in a corner, motionless. After his soul imprint was altered, Han Hao no longer felt like he was being watched. However, after using the demonic blood disassembly art, his body had suffered serious injuries. Apart from his white jade-like bones, his skin, flesh, and meridians had all been torn apart. His divine energy had also been depleted. As if he could never feel pain, Han Hao's expression was calm. He slowly circulated the divine energy in his body to repair his torn skin and flesh. This body, which had been created with a special method, had miraculous regenerative abilities just like Han Shuo. His blood had long since stopped flowing, and his meridians were slowly mending under the effect of his divine energy. Han Hao's body wasn't as monstrous as Han Shuo's. It took him half a month to repair his body. When he regained his mobility, he took out the elixirs that Han Shuo had specially refined for the 5 of them and swallowed them. After recuperating for a period of time, he started to walk out of the belly of the mountain. He continuously hunted people in the vicinity, and devoured their divine energy to replenish the energy he had consumed after using the demonic blood disassembly art. While Han Hao was hunting people to recover his strength, Han Shuo, who couldn't find him, came to the deity Sky Peak alone. Standing at the foot of the deity Sky Peak, Han Shuo raised his head and looked at the peak that pierced the clouds. His gaze was sinister, and his expression was resolute. Chapter 857. Han Shuo went to Venifong Mountain, but he didn't sense Han Hao at all. He searched the surrounding area, but couldn't find any trace of Han Hao. From the information provided by Rose, if anything were to happen to Han Hao, the culprit would definitely be Salus of the 5 sovereigns. Therefore, Han Shuo went to the Empyrean Peak. Salus' subordinates were stationed on the Empyrean Peak. The Empyrean Peak was like a broadsword piercing through the clouds. It was covered with all kinds of defensive boundaries. Even Han Shuo couldn't get to the top of the Empyrean Peak without alerting anyone. Han Shuo raised his head and gazed at the peak of the mountain. He unfolded his consciousness and slowly extended it outwards. He sensed one divine soul after another. After a long while, Han Shuo softly exclaimed. Through the probing of his consciousness, he sensed more than 1,000 divine souls on the Empyrean Peak. Among them, there were 10 of them with high god strength, and 17 of them were late-stage high gods. Even if Salus wasn't on the Empyrean Peak, the forces on the Empyrean Peak were not something an average person could handle. After carefully sensing for a while at the foot of the mountain, Han Shuo did not act rashly. He continued to carefully search for Salus' location. After a while, Han Shuo bunched his brows. He found it rather strange that he couldn't sense Salus' presence on the Empyrean Peak at all. For experts like Salus who had surpassed high god strength, as long as they were on the Empyrean Peak, Han Shuo could more or less sense their presence. As a matter of fact, Han Shuo had used the Great Soul Searching Art. With the Great Soul Searching Art, even Sovereign Asura who was adept at concealing himself would not be able to escape Han Shuo's fiery eyes of gold. But now, Han Shuo couldn't sense Salus' aura at all. Could it be that Salus wasn't on the Empyrean Peak? After thinking about it, Han Shuo was puzzled and wondered if he should go to the deity of Heaven Peak to take a look. If he were to break into the Empyrean Peak today, it would mean that he and Salus would have to shed all pretense of cordiality. Ever since Han Shuo entered the Fringe, although he had killed quite a number of sovereigns, he had never really gone against Salus. Because Han Shuo was not confident that he could defeat the 5 sovereigns, he chose to avoid making an enemy out of them. Now, because of Han Hao, their hostile relationship had been confirmed. If Han Shuo were to wreak havoc in the Empyrean Peak today, Han Shuo and Salus would immediately start a huge battle. Han Shuo had no choice but to be cautious. After hesitating for a long time, Han Shuo finally made up his mind and charged towards the deity Sky Peak. "Who is it?" someone shouted as soon as he entered the Empyrean Peak. Then, a small squad of Empyrean Peak guards vigilantly walked out from a dark corner. All the weapons in their hands were pointed at Han Shuo. "I want to see Salus. Send a message for me," Han Shuo said indifferently after glancing at the pair of guards. "How dare you address his lordship by his name? You are courting death." The guards of the Empyrean Peak were used to being domineering. When they heard Han Shuo address Salus by his name without using any honorifics, they immediately ordered coldly, "Seize him!" The squad of 10 men moved together and surrounded Han Shuo. Unfortunately, they were only mid-god experts as they were stationed at the outermost perimeter of the Empyrean Peak. Confronting Han Shuo with such strength was akin to throwing an egg against a rock. When Han Shuo saw how arrogant and condescending those puny guards of the Empyrean Peak were, he began to understand why Little Skull Han Hao would kill that subordinate of Salus. Since Han Shuo knew that there was no turning back, he showed no mercy. Before the 10 guards could approach him, they were enveloped by an enormous bone flower. The cauldron of myriad demon left Han Shuo's body and shook in the air. The divine souls of the 10 guards flew into the cauldron as light as a feather. As the number of demon generals in the cauldron of myriad demon increased, cauldron spirit's power grew stronger and stronger. Now, there was no need for Han Shuo to do anything. Ordinary mid-gods who were still alive would have their divine souls sucked out of their divine bodies by the light emitted by the cauldron of myriad demon. 10 wisps of grayish smoke drifted into the cauldron of myriad demon. The little cauldron of myriad demon circled around but did not return to Han Shuo's body. Instead, it hovered beside Han Shuo and flew towards the Empyrean Peak together with him. 3 energy towers simultaneously overflowed with blue radiance, forming a faint blue barrier that blocked Han Shuo's path. Before Han Shuo could destroy the barrier, shadowy figures whizzed out from the cauldron of myriad demon, surged up, and tore the blue barrier apart. The cauldron of myriad demon, which was originally only the size of a fist, suddenly grew to the size of a man. It struck a certain spot in between the 3 energy towers. With a loud boom, the 3 energy towers shattered in an instant, turning into stone fragments that flew in all directions. "Who dares to come to the Empyrean Peak and court death?" An angry shout came from halfway up the Empyrean Peak. One after another, agile figures descended from the peak. The man in the cauldron of myriad demon ignored the demons that were descending from above and continued to charge towards the peak. With the cauldron of myriad demon leading the way, the cauldron of myriad demon crumbled all the barriers and energy towers they encountered. There was no need for Han Shuo to worry at all. Along the way, the energy towers exploded and the barriers were torn apart by demon generals, allowing Han Shuo to proceed unimpeded. It was only now that Han Shuo realized that the cauldron of myriad demons' strength had indeed skyrocketed after devouring the divine souls of hundreds and thousands of gods. The cauldron of myriad demon was originally the supreme treasure of demonic sections. It knew all kinds of demonic formations like the back of its hand. The various barriers in this world were connected to some demonic formations. With the power of demon generals, it had no trouble destroying the barriers. At first, Han Shuo was worried that the ubiquitous barriers on the Empyrean Peak would make it difficult for him to move forward. However, the cauldron of myriad demons' performance completely dispelled his worries. As the barriers and energy towers were destroyed one after another, Han Shuo's mind gradually grew frantic. It was only a matter of time before he confronted the 5 sovereigns. Now that Han Hao had killed someone, given Salus's vengeful nature, the grudge was set in stone. At this point, the most crucial part of the battle was to destroy as much of the enemy's forces as possible. Once he made a move, he would spare no effort. With the cauldron of myriad demon leading the way, the barriers and energy towers blocking their way were destroyed one after another. The man in the cauldron of myriad demons soon approached the mountainside. It was at this moment that Salus's subordinates finally arrived. Many of them were high gods. Most of them were early-stage and mid-stage high gods. They were all fuming with rage and were ready to tear Han Shuo to shreds. The 5 sovereigns of the fringe were constantly fighting each other. However, never before had they charged into one another's territory. The 5 sovereigns would only let their subordinates fight each other or fight one-on-one in secret. It was very rare for the 5 sovereigns to attack someone else's subordinates. Therefore, although the 5 sovereigns were constantly fighting each other, the Empyrean Peak had never been affected. Ordinary people would try their best to avoid a place like the deity of Heaven Peak. They would never come here to seek their own death. Whose territory was the Empyrean Peak? Salus. Other than the 5 sovereigns, who would dare trespass on the Empyrean Peak? When Salus's subordinates discovered the huge commotion coming from the foot of the mountain, when they saw the energy towers being destroyed and the barriers of the Empyrean Peak being destroyed, they felt as though they had been slapped in the face in front of their faces. They couldn't help but be enraged. When they flew down from the mountain and discovered that there was only one person, they were a little shaken. They thought that the intruder was one of the 4 sovereigns. However, they soon discovered that this audacious intruder was not one of the 4 sovereigns. With that, their courage was boosted and they began to forget themselves. Good, good, good! Han Sho grinned hideously. With one thought, 17 flying swords whizzed out. Each and every one of these deadly flying swords was incomparably sharp and carried acid and cold toxins. They were the best weapons for killing and reaping lives. Those who charged at Han Sho first were penetrated by the 17 flying swords in an instant. Their divine bodies rapidly melted into a puddle of blood. Han Sho extended his 10 fingers and the demonic blades burst out. He charged into the crowd while laughing heartily. Wherever the demonic blades pointed, severed limbs and flesh would be torn apart. None of the demonic blades could withstand a single blow. Han Sho had now reached the pinnacle of the Omen realm. On top of Cauldron Spirit's strength, no high god could stop him. Han Sho suddenly realized that the only way for him to make a breakthrough with his current strength was to find an opponent of equal, or even stronger than him and fight him to the death. And Salus was exactly the opponent that Han Sho needed the most right now. After making up his mind, Han Sho no longer had the slightest trace of fear in his heart. Instead, he eagerly hoped that Salus would show up and have a good fight with him. Even if he couldn't defeat Salus, as long as he could leave the Empyrean Peak alive, he would have a great chance of making a breakthrough. Once he truly stepped into a new realm, Han Sho believed that he would be the one to make the rules of the Fringe. This was a risky challenge. Where's Salus? Where's Salus? Show yourself! Han Sho gradually went berserk. He roared shrilly on the Empyrean Peak. He showed no mercy in his attacks. His demonic blades tore apart one divine body after another. With the super-strong defensive power of Han Sho's invincible Omen body, the attacks that came from all directions were completely ineffective. The sharp divine weapons that stabbed into Han Sho's body felt as though they were stabbing into the hardest metal and stone. They couldn't cause the slightest bit of damage to Han Sho. Han Sho laughed heartily as he charged straight towards the summit of the Empyrean Peak. He would kill anyone who stood in his way. The cauldron of myriad demon turned into a hazy shadow as it absorbed one divine soul after another. In just a short while, dozens of divine souls had disappeared into the cauldron of myriad demon. Han Sho and the cauldron of myriad demon cooperated with tacit understanding and complemented each other. With an unstoppable momentum, they charged straight for the summit. Along the way, more and more ferocious gods came out to intercept Han Sho. However, none of them could stop Han Sho's advance. They all died tragically at Han Sho's hands. Even more energy towers and boundaries were destroyed by the cauldron of myriad demon. Although the cauldron of myriad demon appeared to be powerless, it helped Han Sho solve his greatest problem. Master, be careful. The new barrier is very powerful. Cauldron Spirit suddenly transmitted to Han Sho. Han Sho focused his gaze and discovered that the final pass to the summit was filled with terrifying bolts of lightning. The lightning crackled as it leaped about, as if it had a life of its own, forming an enormous ring that surrounded the summit. Without a doubt, this was the final barrier deployed by Salus. Chapter 858. On the summit of the Empyrean Peak, those subordinates of Salus were staring coldly at Han Sho, who was separated by a barrier. There were quite a few late-stage high god experts among them. In addition to their messy subordinates, there were about 300 of them. These were the true elites under Salus' command. However, they did not charge over the barrier to attack Han Sho. Instead, they calmly looked at Han Sho from the other side of the barrier. They wanted to see if Han Sho had the ability to break the lightning magnetic field deployed by Salus. The reason why they did not attack recklessly was because they had seen Han Sho's insanity from above. A mid-stage high god expert was killed in a single blow by Han Sho. Dozens of attacks made of all kinds of divine energies landed on Han Sho but failed to cause any damage to Han Sho. This scene had greatly shocked the observers on the summit. It was obvious that Han Sho's strength had exceeded the limits of an ordinary high god. None of them, not even the magnates of the fringe, dared to joke around with their lives when faced with an expert with unfathomable strength. Fortunately, Salus had deployed a powerful lightning barrier on the summit of the Empyrean Peak. These people were silently watching Han Sho. They wanted to see if Han Sho had the strength to destroy the barrier deployed by Salus. Han Sho remained motionless as he attentively sensed the blazing energy contained in the lightning barrier. He unfolded his consciousness, and could even sense the element of lightning and thunder leaping on the surface of the dazzling electric barrier. The element of lightning and thunder were very active. They gathered in pairs and wandered on the surface of the barrier. The densely packed element of lightning was moving in a trajectory that Han Sho could not understand. The element of lightning that was hard to see with the naked eye seemed to have a life of its own. It was dancing cheerfully, leaving not the slightest gap on the surface of the lightning barrier. "Master, this lightning barrier is extremely harmful to demon generals. I can't use my demon generals to destroy it," Cauldron's spirit transmitted, indicating that it was powerless. Demon generals were immune to physical damage and were almost immune to earth, death, and other divine energies. However, fire and thunder were very destructive to demon generals. This lightning barrier was the natural enemy of demon generals. Therefore, Cauldron's spirit could not use its demon generals to destroy the barrier. Han Sho pondered for a moment. With one thought, he recalled the cauldron of myriad demon into his body. His avatars of death and destruction suddenly unfolded their domains of divinity. When the three souls released their connection, the domains of divinity of the two high gods gradually fused together. With Han Sho at the center, the energy of destruction began to spread. An enormous amount of the element of death within 100 miles suddenly frantically converged towards Han Sho. In just an instant, the area where Han Sho was located had undergone earth-shattering changes. The shattered energy towers on the Empyrean Peak were uprooted. Crushed rocks shot in all directions. An enormous amount of the element of death circulated in the form of the Edict of Destruction. The divine energy of destruction in Han Sho's body condensed into orbs of destruction. Those orbs of destruction formed purely from the divine energy of destruction in Han Sho's body appeared in Han Sho's newly formed domain of divinity. They absorbed the element of death that gathered in the vicinity like a whale sucking in water. Logically speaking, it was impossible for the energy of destruction and the energy of death to fuse. It was also impossible for the orbs of destruction to fuse with the element of death. However, in Han Sho's domain of divinity formed by fusing the two domains of divinity, the orbs of destruction that were rotating at high speed in accordance with the Edict of Destruction were forcibly absorbing all the element of death. After the orbs of destruction were filled with the element of death, they expanded to the size of a human head. Every single one of them was as green as natural jade. There was a grayish liquid flowing within them. Han Sho was the only one who knew that the grayish liquid inside the orbs of destruction was the element of death that had been condensed by 1,000 times. The orbs of destruction were rotating around him at an increasing speed. Gradually, Han Sho lost himself and immersed himself in the orbs of destruction, controlling everything with the consciousness of his main body. Suddenly, a wondrous feeling surged into Han Sho's heart. In an instant, Han Sho felt as if he had transformed into a myriad of orbs of destruction and was situated in the middle of those orbs of destruction. It was as if he was the orb and the orbs were his own body. This feeling only lasted for a split second. After that, Han Sho came back to his senses. All of a sudden, Han Sho felt as if the orbs of destruction that were revolving around him had become an extension of his soul, a part of his body. It was as if every single orb of destruction carried a strand of his soul energy, as if they contained a drop of blood essence. What was even more astonishing was that he felt as if those orbs of destruction had a consciousness of their own. With a single thought from him, those orbs of destruction would perfectly carry out his orders according to his will. This feeling was very peculiar, and it gave Han Sho the illusion that everything was unreal. The orbs of destruction continued to rotate in his domain of divinity. When Han Sho focused his attention on the lightning barrier in front of him and started to think of a way to destroy it, Those orbs of destruction that had become extremely strange seemed to know what Han Sho was thinking. They let out cheers that only Han Sho could hear and charged into the lightning barrier that Salus had personally set up. Ah, the electricity is so strong! Damn Rayleigh! Let's bite them to death together! Kill, kill! In an instant, all kinds of strange thoughts surged into Han Sho's consciousness. Those thoughts came from the souls on the orbs of destruction, and they described the battle between them and the lightning consciousness on Salus's lightning barrier. Dead, they're all dead! We've won! In 1 second, the souls on those orbs of destruction had transmitted hundreds of millions of messages to Han Sho. The result of the battle between those strange consciousnesses had also been decided in 1 second. When Han Sho finally received a message like, "We've won!" an earth-shattering boom resounded in his ears. Han Sho was startled awake. Those messy consciousnesses that had surged into his mind instantly disappeared without a trace. It was as if everything that had just happened was just his imagination. It was so unreal. After calming himself down, Han Sho focused his eyes and discovered that the lightning barrier that had protected the entire Empyrean Peak had disappeared without a trace. Tiny lightning bolts had shot out and scattered on the mountainside of the Empyrean Peak. After carefully sensing for a moment, Han Sho discovered that those scattered lightning bolts no longer had the strange consciousness of life. It was as if they had all been killed in an instant. Traces of misty green and dusky light fell to the bottom of the mountain along with the feeble energy of lightning. Those rays of light were filled with the energy of destruction and death. Han Sho wore a blank face as though he sensed something from those fading rays of light. "Congratulations, Master! The energy you experienced just now is known as primordial Dharma embodiment in our world. In this world, it is known as elemental soul. Although the name is different, the form it manifests is similar. Master, you have unintentionally comprehended this state, and can make breakthroughs in your demonic arts and the strength of your 2 avatars. Master, you must be careful. Comprehending primordial Dharma embodiment also means that the heavenly tribulation may descend at any time," the cauldron spirit transmitted while Han Sho was still puzzled. Primordial Dharma embodiment and elemental soul were one of the most profound ways of utilizing energy. They could bestow life to offensive energy. Just now, Han Sho's orb of destruction had gathered the divine energy of destruction and the element of death. Yet, it was bestowed with life by Han Sho's consciousness. Chapter 859. On the Empyrean Peak, Han Sho was on a killing spree. Hundreds and thousands of demon generals were flying around the peak, chasing after Salus subordinates, who only had mid-god strength. Han Sho had deployed the pearls of annihilation, cyan demonic shuttle, toxic dragon cloud net, green phosphorus gravel, and banner of hallucination. For a moment, the peak of the Empyrean Peak was filled with gloomy winds, ghostly wails, and wolf howls. Han Sho unsheathed his 17 flying swords and ruthlessly slaughtered those true experts. Inside the new domain of divinity, the orbs of destruction absorbed the element of death and were bestowed with life by Han Sho. The orbs of destruction exploded in areas with a lot of people, killing Salus subordinates one after another. It was only when Han Sho went all out and utilized all the demonic weapons in his possession that he discovered just how much destructive power he could cause. The pearls of annihilation, cyan demonic shuttle, toxic dragon cloud net, green phosphorus gravel, and banner of hallucination were all vicious demonic weapons refined by Han Sho. Each and every one of them had the power to kill a group of people. The power of the souls of element, which he had just mastered not too long ago, became even more terrifying when the orbs of annihilation exploded. Incessant rumbles sounded from all directions with Han Sho at the center. Corpses were torn apart and sent flying. Severed limbs and heads were scattered all over the place. In just a short while, the Empyrean Peak had turned into a river of blood. More than 200 gods had perished. The killing intent, resentment, and boundless hatred of those who perished were absorbed by the 17 flying swords. The killing intent of the 17 flying swords grew denser and denser. Every time one of the flying swords slashed at the target's mind would be seized by the overwhelming killing intent condensed on the flying swords. The flying swords would pierce through the target's abdomen and kill them on the spot. Cauldron Spirit was cheering inside the cauldron of Myriad Demon. It was pulling the divine souls that had yet to dissipate into the cauldron of Myriad Demon. Cauldron Spirit appeared to be very excited after devouring more than 200 divine souls in just a short while. It was doing its utmost to control the demon generals. Even though Salus's subordinates had found a way to deal with the demon generals, they couldn't withstand the ferocious attack of hundreds of demon generals. Even the gods who cultivated the power of fire and lightning were devoured by the demon generals in an instant. The Empyrean Peak had become hell on earth. Shrill and ear-piercing shrieks filled the air. Salus's 17 direct subordinates, each of them possessing late-stage high god strength, were powerless against Han Shuo's all-encompassing attacks. They couldn't even join hands and could only watch helplessly as Han Shuo drifted from place to place like a specter. They couldn't find any trace of Han Shuo. Han Shuo laughed maniacally. His eyes gradually turned dark red, and his heart gradually turned crazy. Later on, layers of dense killing intent began to hover around Han Shuo like a light mist. The negative energy formed by the instant death of the dead was attracted by the evil aura emitted by Han Shuo and didn't dissipate. In Han Shuo's mind, there was only the thought of endless slaughter. He would kill any living being that appeared in front of him. He had joined the demonic path. Ever since Han Shuo broke through to the Omen realm, he had long been able to control his state of mind. But this time, he joined the demonic path. Han Shuo suddenly discovered that he had lost control of his consciousness. Everything happened so naturally and without the slightest disharmony. It was as though he was supposed to annihilate every living being in the world. At this moment, Han Shuo had lost control of himself. However, he could freely use any demonic technique that he knew. At this moment, Han Shuo had completely turned into a ferocious god. In his heart, there was only the thought of destroying everything. The further he went, the crazier Han Shuo became. His dark red eyes shone with a ferocious light that could destroy the world. He no longer cared about the attacks that landed on his body. The Omen invincible body automatically blocked all kinds of attacks, so that his demonic body didn't suffer any damage. At this moment, Han Shuo was undoubtedly very terrifying. With his ferocious appearance, it was as though he wanted to destroy all living beings. There was no pity in his heart, no hesitation, no thought of stopping. There was only an indomitable frenzy of slaughter. One after another, gods were torn apart by his hands. Their divine souls were annihilated by the dim light in his hands. Although Han Shuo's demonic body was impervious to all kinds of attacks, his clothes were shredded to shreds by the attacks. At this moment, Han Shuo was almost completely naked. His majestic body was covered in chunks of rock-hard muscles. His veins were clearly visible. Like a demonic god that could destroy the world, every attack of Han Shuo's was earth-shattering. Not a single person dared to take a single blow from him. 3 of Salus's subordinates cultivated in the energy of earth that was said to possess the strongest defense. They all possessed late-stage high god strength. Although they joined forces to resist a casual punch from Han Shuo, they were blasted deep into the earth by Han Shuo's terrifying energy. At this moment, Han Shuo was invincible on the Empyrean Peak. Why isn't Lord Salus here yet? This man. Who can stop him? One of Salus's subordinates retreated with a look of horror on his face, but he still shouted loudly. Let's retreat from the Empyrean Peak! If we stay here, I'm afraid that we won't be able to see Lord Salus again, suggested another to Han Shuo with a bitter face. Who the hell is this guy? Since when did such a crazy and terrifying guy come to the fringe? All kinds of voices came from the mouths of Salus's subordinates. It was obvious that they were truly afraid. Suddenly, a series of rumbling thunder sounded from the void. A dazzling lightning bolt several times brighter than the sun struck Han Shuo's body. Han Shuo, who had always been invincible when it came to killing anyone in his way, suddenly shook his majestic body. His fluttering long hair stood on end, complementing his dark red pupils. His malevolent appearance appeared even more terrifying and ferocious. Han Shuo's eyes were still dark red. However, he had recovered his lost consciousness. He raised his head and looked at the 3-meter-tall giant Salus. Han Shuo's eyes were still dark red. Although his consciousness had returned to normal, Han Shuo's demonized state did not vanish. When he regained his consciousness, he immediately realized that he had been demonized in an inexplicable state. Due to the lack of self-awareness, the demonized state was extremely dangerous. If there were any allies around him, he would kill them as well. However, there was another kind of demonized state in which one could freely control one's consciousness. Although not as calm as usual, one could at least restrain himself from killing his own allies. This kind of demonized state was the last hurdle of the 9 Changes realm, demonic morph. Han Shuo quickly adjusted himself, maintaining the explosive desire to kill in his heart. He glared at Salus, who had finally caught up, and bellowed, "Salus?" The muscles on Salus' face twitched. His monstrous rage was obvious. The corpses and shattered energy towers on the Empyrean Peak were enough to prove what Han Shuo had just done. As one of the 5 sovereigns of the Fringe, no one had ever dared to act so presumptuously on his Empyrean Peak. Even Tyre, the strongest of the 5 sovereigns, did not personally attack the ordinary gods on the Empyrean Peak. This was an unspoken agreement between the 5 sovereigns. But today, the Empyrean Peak that symbolized Salus's identity and status was nearly destroyed. More than 300 of his subordinates were slaughtered. This kind of humiliation was something that had never happened to Salus in 10,000 years. The rage in Salus's heart nearly burned him to death. He panted heavily in silence for 3 seconds. During these 3 seconds, Salus took in everything that happened on the Empyrean Peak. The scene intensified his desire to make Han Shuo pay in blood. Without a word of nonsense, without even asking about Han Shuo's origins, after 3 seconds of silence, Salus transformed into a giant with electric dragons coiling around his body. He pounced at Han Shuo from the sky. As soon as Salus moved, the sky was filled with the rumbling of thunder. Deafening explosions of thunder, accompanied by bizarre energy undulations, were aimed at Han Shuo alone. As soon as the thunderclaps sounded, the space around Han Shuo violently exploded. It was as though the thunderclaps had always been around him, and were triggered the moment the thunderclaps sounded. The thunderclaps were ear-piercing, and the explosive force was aimed at one's body. Any high god who was struck by the thunderclaps would undoubtedly die on the spot. Even without the thunderclaps, the waves of thunderclaps alone were enough to disperse the divine soul of an ordinary high god. However, Han Shuo's invincible omen body was far superior to that of an ordinary high god. The deafening thunderclaps that were projected into Han Shuo's ears and consciousness only made Han Shuo dizzy for a moment. Then, the violent explosions enveloped Han Shuo's entire body. At that moment, Han Shuo's invincible omen body automatically defended against the thunderclaps. The thunderclaps were over. Han Shuo's naked body was charred black. He was still standing on the same spot. Although the invincible omen body had blocked the explosive force, it was not that easy for an overgod to attack. Wisps of weak thunderclaps surged into Han Shuo's demonic body in an instant. The thunderclaps also had their own consciousness. As soon as they entered Han Shuo's demonic body, they immediately charged into Han Shuo's consciousness, as though they were prepared to make the first move and blow up Han Shuo's consciousness. The wisps of thunderclaps also carried explosive force. They were waiting to detonate after they entered Han Shuo's consciousness. Han Shuo understood that the souls cultivated by the gods of this world were not as versatile as the consciousness cultivated by demonic arts practitioners. Once an attack penetrated the surface of the body and struck the mind or divine soul, all it would take would be a small explosion or impact to cause the consciousness of the divine soul to dissipate, or even the soul to be completely obliterated. Any other high god would not be able to escape death after receiving such an attack from Salus. However, for Han Shuo, who was a master of demonic arts, such insignificant tricks were a piece of cake. With one thought, strands of demonic yuan rapidly flowed through his body. Before the lightning energy that entered his body could rush towards his consciousness, it was all intercepted. All the weak consciousnesses were killed within Han Shuo's body. Han Shuo raised his head and saw that Salus had just arrived. Nice! Han Shuo grinned. He took to the sky and charged at Salus. He clawed with both hands. The murderous aura that lingered around him transformed into 2 black dragons that bit at Salus. Chapter 860. To Han Shuo, not only was Salus a formidable foe in the fringe, but he was also the key that could help him make a breakthrough. Han Shuo would go all out in this battle. No matter the outcome, he would be the one with the upper hand. Even if he lost, he would be able to use demonic blood disassembly to escape. Not only would he be able to see the true strength of an overgod and achieve a breakthrough in his demonic arts, but he would also be able to make a name for himself in the fringe. He would be able to let all the gods in the fringe know that there was one more expert who could contend against Salus. As long as the weak could guarantee their own survival in challenging the strong, no matter how one looked at it, it was a great advantage. Han Shuo made a grasping motion with both hands. His murderous aura turned into a dragon and bit down on Salus, who was flying down from the 9th heaven. With one thought, the cauldron of myriad demon and the 17 flying swords flew back. They gave up on attacking the small fries in the surroundings and focused all their attention on Salus. Salus' body was covered in dazzling electric arcs. He had turned into an electric man with terrifying electric currents coiling around his body. Bolts of lightning struck down at the black dragon formed by Han Shuo's murderous aura. Dazzling electric sparks were aroused, and thunder boomed across the Empyrean Peak. Salus's subordinates, fearing that they would be caught in the shockwaves of the battle between the 2 peerless experts, quickly retreated to the foot of the mountain, leaving the summit to Han Shuo and Salus. They stood at the foot of the mountain and watched the commotion from afar. It was only after exchanging blows with Salus that Han Shuo realized just how terrifying an overgod's strength was. Even with the full power of the Cauldron of Spirit and the 17 flying swords, Han Shuo was unable to gain the upper hand. Salus's understanding and mastery of the element of lightning had reached an extremely miraculous level. His divine body was filled with the element of lightning. Every strike he made contained boundless energy of lightning. The black dragon formed by Han Shuo's murderous aura immediately dissipated after being struck by hundreds of lightning bolts. As Salus's residence, the Empyrean Peak had more element of lightning than any other place. On top of the Empyrean Peak, Salus was able to utilize more element of lightning. In addition to the divine energy of lightning contained in his body, his strength was much greater than anywhere else. If it weren't for Han Shuo's incomparably tough demonic body and if it weren't for Han Shuo's cauldron of spirit's energy, Han Shuo wouldn't have been able to hold on for so long under the bombardment of lightning. The 17 flying swords formed a sword net in an attempt to trap Salus within it. However, the lightning energy Salus directed accurately struck the 17 flying swords, disrupting their trajectories and preventing Han Shuo from setting up the grand formation. Han Shuo's eyes were dark red. The muscles on his majestic body contorted as wisps of dark demonic energy were released from his body. He looked like a ferocious god from the depths of hell. Han Shuo's avatar of destruction had transformed into the demon's lair edge. He clenched the demon's lair edge tightly in his right hand as he clashed with Salus. Salus unfolded his domain of divinity. Electric arcs rained down from the sky above the Empyrean Peak. The entire Empyrean Peak was covered in a densely packed electric net. Wherever the electric net was connected, there would definitely be lightning energy present. In this space filled with electric nets and rumbling thunder, Han Shuo would touch the electric net even if he didn't move an inch, and the lightning energy would enter his body. Fortunately, the new domain formed from the fusion of the 2 domains of divinity was equally domineering. With Han Shuo at the center, it forcibly tore open a space and rapidly gathered the element of death in the vicinity. He was using the element of death and edict of destruction to contend against Salus's domain of divinity. During the confrontation with Salus, Han Sho could feel that even if he exerted all his strength, it would still be very difficult. Moreover, Han Sho faintly felt that Salas hadn't used his full strength yet. This made Han Sho feel as if he was facing a formidable enemy. He was ready to receive even fiercer attacks from Salas at any moment. The battle continued. Gradually, Salas became somewhat impatient. Suddenly, Salas let out a furious roar. No one knew what method he used, but the electric arcs falling down from his domain of divinity suddenly became several times thicker. Earth-shaking thunderclaps resounded in his domain of divinity. In just an instant, not only Salas's domain of divinity, but even Salas himself seemed to have become several times stronger. Han Sho was already having a hard time holding on even before Salas used his full strength. Now that Salas' strength had suddenly skyrocketed, Han Sho's situation suddenly became extremely difficult. There were a few mid-level material planes a great distance away from Elysium. All the living beings on these mid-level material planes worship Salas as their one and only God. Salas would obtain strands of faith energy from these worshippers at all times. On these mid-level material planes, statues of Salas were worshipped, and shrines were built to worship Salas. Some of those devout worshippers even possessed demigod or base god strength. They traveled between major material planes and, under the will of Salas, spread Salas's divine might to every corner of the world so that Salas could receive even more worshippers. But at this moment, all the worshippers on those planes that worship Salas as their one and only God started vomiting blood. Sanguiner's soul dissipated. The faith energy contained in those souls transcended space and was transferred to Salas on Elysium. There were hundreds of millions of living beings on those material planes. Every single one of them worshipped Salas as their overgod. But in an instant, all of their souls dissipated. Those material planes became desolate planets without the slightest aura of life. On Elysium, Salas' strength had skyrocketed. His domain of divinity pressed down on Han Sho, rendering him powerless to resist. Terrifying bolts of lightning the size of small mountains bombarded Han Sho's body. Even invincible Omen body was unable to withstand it. His skin and flesh split open and blood flowed freely. Even invincible Omen body had its limits. When the power of the bombardment far exceeded the limits of invincible Omen body, it would not be able to withstand all the damage. In just an instant, Han Sho's body was severely injured. He felt dizzy and had the illusion that he did not know where he was. "Master, wake up! Wake up!" Cauldron Spirit's voice resounded in Han Sho's mind. The muddle-headed Han Sho abruptly woke up. The next moment, he felt a stinging pain all over his body. It had been a long time since he had experienced this kind of tearing pain after achieving minor mastery of invincible Omen body. At this moment, Han Sho actually felt a perverted pleasure. Han Sho raised his head and saw that the entire Empyrean peak was filled with lightning bolts. The lightning bolts seemed to have connected heaven and earth, filling every inch of space and bombarding down like a torrential downpour. Salas coldly looked down at Han Sho. His face was frosty. It seemed that he would not allow Han Sho to escape today. At this moment, Han Sho's consciousness became somewhat absent-minded. For some reason, he suddenly felt as though something was about to happen. Han Sho's heart suddenly calmed down. At this moment, he had the epiphany of the end of heaven and earth. It was as though a pair of eyes had penetrated through layers of space, traveled through the river of time, and saw the beginning of Elysium. With an apathetic face, Han Sho observed everything with indifference. All kinds of epiphanies leaped into his mind. Complicated and cryptic chants seemed to have broken free from their shackles and turned into rays of light that drifted in his consciousness. The beginning of all things, the end of heaven and earth, the end of heaven and earth, no man and no thing, the chaos has yet to be divided. In the void, Salas no longer hesitated. He was ready to kill Han Sho. It was at this moment that Salas suddenly realized that he had lost contact with the lightning energy that filled the world. The lightning bolts that came crashing down were no longer under his control and started wreaking havoc throughout the entire Empyrean peak. They were no longer confined to the peak, but even the middle and the foot of the mountain. Many of his subordinates, who were hiding at the foot of the mountain and watching the changes on the peak, were caught off guard and struck by the lightning bolts. Without the terrifying defensive power of Han Shuo's demonic body, they were killed on the spot. All of a sudden, boundless elemental energies converged from all directions. Light, darkness, earth, fire, wind, water, lightning, and death, as well as all kinds of energies, such as the murderous aura, the aura of fear, and the energy of souls that had yet to dissipate, rushed into the Empyrean Peak as though they were being drawn by some kind of force. These energies did not seem to be under anyone's control. It was as though they were drawn by the most fundamental principles of the universe. After they gathered on the Empyrean Peak, they attacked all living beings on the Empyrean Peak in waves, as though they were going to destroy the world. The boundaries and energy towers deployed by Salus that were not destroyed by Han Shuo suddenly exploded. Salus' subordinates at the foot of the mountain wailed like ghosts and howled like wolves. Under the bombardment of light, darkness, earth, fire, wind, water, lightning, death, and all kinds of strange energies, hundreds of corpses littered the ground in an instant. "Master, the heavenly tribulation of the Skybreak realm is coming. Be careful. Don't worry about Salus, use all your strength to resist the heavenly tribulation." Cauldron's spirit was still shouting. However, Han Shuo did not seem to be able to hear anything. He was in a daze, trying to comprehend the various comprehensions in his consciousness. It was only when a meteorite suddenly came from beyond the heavens and bombarded Han Shuo into the hard rocks of the Empyrean Peak that Han Shuo suddenly came to his senses. He discovered that the Empyrean Peak had undergone earth-shattering changes. All kinds of apocalyptic energies were wreaking havoc on the Empyrean Peak. Light, darkness, earth, fire, wind, water, lightning, death, and all kinds of other energies were slowly accumulating the most powerful wave of attacks. And their target was Han Shuo. He could clearly sense that those energies that seemed to follow the most fundamental principles of the universe had locked onto him from afar, as though they had a life of their own. Once they were done accumulating, they would blast him and the entire Empyrean Peak to smithereens. Han Shuo could sense that no matter where he fled to, he would not be able to evade the attacks of these energies. All he could do was face them head-on. If he couldn't withstand the heavenly tribulation, his consciousness would dissipate. From then on, there would no longer be a person named Han Shuo or Brian in this world. If he could withstand it, he would break through to the Skybreak realm, his strength would skyrocket, and he would become a true overlord of the fringe. Chapter 861. Salus could do nothing but watch as the anomaly on the Empyrean Peak unfold. His subordinates on the mountainside and at the foot of the mountain had suffered heavy casualties. He himself was unable to help his subordinates defend against the onslaught. He could only roar from the mountaintop, "Get out of my way! All of you, get out of my way!" The gods at the foot of the mountain were bombarded by the pillars of light amidst the anomaly. The space above the Empyrean Peak seemed to have been torn apart. Enormous meteors came crashing down from the sky. Even the lightning and divine lightning that Salus had summoned were no longer under his control. They too bombarded the Empyrean Peak. Salus was about to attack Han Shuo when he suddenly realized that the only thing he could use was the divine energy in his body. It was as though the connection between him and the lightning that filled the sky had been forcibly severed by an invisible weapon, preventing him from using external forces to kill Han Shuo. Meanwhile, around Han Shuo, layers upon layers of chaotic elemental energies were converging, forming a natural barrier that even Han Shuo could not detect. Before he even got close, he discovered that waves of energy were pressing down on him, forcing him to continuously retreat. After carefully sensing for a moment, Salus suddenly discovered that the anomaly on the Empyrean Peak was indeed caused by Han Shuo. However, the anomaly seemed to be extremely aggressive, and its target just so happened to be Han Shuo. Salus was extremely astonished. He did not know how Han Shuo was able to gather so many different types of elemental energies together. When he discovered that the main target of those energies was Han Shuo, he abruptly let go of them. He no longer attempted to break through the layers of obstacles to attack Han Shuo. Instead, he chose to observe from the sidelines. Surrounded by the various types of elemental energies, Han Shuo's majestic body glowed with black radiance. Demonic yuan filled every corner of his body. Under Cauldron Spirit's reminder, he calmly faced the oncoming demonic calamity. After accumulating the power for a long time, it gradually formed an earth-shattering attack in the void above Han Shuo's head. The first to arrive was the power of thunder and lightning gathered by Salus. Amidst the rumbling of the heavenly thunder, a bolt of lightning as thick as a dragon blasted directly towards his head. Its power was no weaker than that of Salus's earlier attack. Facing the bombardment of the lightning, Han Shuo's 17 flying swords formed a barrier to resist. In the earth-shattering boom, Han Shuo's scalp went numb, his hands and feet stiffened, and faint smoke rose from his body. His body, which had just been injured by Salus, was once again injured. The demon physique's injuries were even worse. There were still a few more waves of energy condensing in the void. A red meteorite the size of a small mountain gradually appeared in the torn void. Just by looking at its astonishing aura, Han Shuo could tell how much energy was contained in it. Master, I don't know why, but the power of the demon ring seems to have increased in this universe. It was at this moment that Cauldron Spirit once again transmitted. Judging from the current power of the demon ring, it will be very difficult for Master to defend against all of them. You must think of an appropriate solution. The meteorite was still accumulating power. Small meteorites scattered around it were as though attracted by a magnet, and attached themselves to the enormous meteorite. The enormous meteorite hovered above Han Shuo's head. Han Shuo could sense that the meteorite had locked onto him from afar. It was as though he was another magnet that could attract the meteorite. What solution? Han Shuo was dumbfounded. At this moment, he simply couldn't think of a solution to defend against the demonic tribulation. Master, if you ignite the soul energy of demon generals, I can help you mitigate a few waves of attacks. That way, you might be able to defend against the demonic tribulation. Cauldron Spirit proposed after hesitating for a moment. There were hundreds and thousands of demon generals in the cauldron of myriad demon. As one of the most precious treasures of demonic arts, the cauldron of myriad demon had infinite uses. Using the energy of demon generals to defend against the demonic tribulation could be considered as a solution. Right, the demonic tribulation targets my soul. I have 3 souls. Do you think that the demonic tribulation will split into 3 parts? Han Shuo suddenly thought of this idea. He hastily asked Cauldron Spirit for confirmation. It's useless. The demonic tribulation only targets the soul of the main body that carries the consciousness imprint of demonic arts. The other 2 souls do not cultivate demonic arts. The demonic tribulation will not split the slightest bit of energy for them. Han Shuo stared blankly for a moment. At this moment, the crimson meteorite that had finished accumulating power suddenly shot down towards Han Shuo like a blazing meteor. All the element of fire in the vicinity immediately surged into the crimson meteorite. It was as though the energy of Fire Elite Zombie and Metal Elite Zombie had been combined, filling the meteorite with blazing flames. The Demon's Lair Edge was the first weapon Han Shuo had crafted. After Han Shuo had infused it with his demonic yuan, Han Shuo forgot himself at this moment. He manipulated the Demon's Lair Edge to meet the incoming crimson meteorite. At the same time, the 17 flying swords soared into the sky and transformed into sword radiances that filled the sky in the style of Avicii. Just like the Demon's Lair Edge, they bombarded the crimson meteorite. An earth-shattering boom suddenly sounded from the Empyrean Peak. Han Shuo's consciousness trembled. He, who was connected to the Demon's Lair Edge and the 17 flying swords, felt as though he was struck by a gigantic meteorite weighing millions of kilograms. His eardrums buzzed and his entire body went numb. Whether it was the Demon's Lair Edge or the 17 flying swords, they were unparalleled divine weapons. Even the meteorite formed by the demonic tribulation had a small crack torn open by them. Han Shuo endured the heart-wrenching pain in his body, mobilized the energy of the 17 flying swords and the Demon's Lair Edge, and aimed for the crack in the center of the meteorite. Clang! 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 The gigantic meteorite could no longer withstand the repeated bombardment of the 17 flying swords and the demon's lair edge. It suddenly shattered, transforming into pillars of fire that bombarded Han Shuo. In this way, Han Shuo could destroy them one by one, desperately reducing the impact of the pillars of fire. Once those pillars of fire fell beside Han Shuo, they immediately became dead objects, and no longer moved. It was as though Han Shuo was their final destination. Even if they couldn't hit Han Shuo, as long as they reached Han Shuo's position, their mission would be accomplished. After expending a lot of strength and energy, Han Shuo finally avoided this wave of attacks. Taking out a large amount of pills of rejuvenation from his space ring, Han Shuo chewed them like they were beans. His two avatars no longer dodged. The demon's lair edge and skeletal staff each transformed into another Han Shuo, releasing their domains of divinity and fusing them together. As soon as the new domain of divinity formed from the fusion of the two domains of divinity of destruction and death was formed, a miraculous change occurred. The moment Han Shuo's new domain of divinity was formed, the surrounding elemental energies no longer continued to surge into the top of his head, nor did they gather in the new energy that was being produced. Before the new domain of divinity was formed, the demonic tribulation above his head was still accumulating energy, preparing for the next wave of even more ferocious attacks. However, as soon as the new domain of divinity was formed, the surrounding elemental energies seemed to be affected. They could no longer increase their power from the surrounding elements. Not only that, the elemental energy of death, fear, resentment, and other negative energies in the air were attracted by the domain of divinity formed from the fusion of the two domains of divinity. They slowly surged into Han Shuo's new domain of divinity, forming a thick layer of cloud-like barrier above Han Shuo's head. "This is miraculous! Master, we're saved!" Cauldron Spirit immediately sensed the changes in the surroundings and shouted. Blades of wind filled the sky, swords of ice pierced through the air, and the light of annihilation sprinkled down. Wave after wave of attacks rained down on Han Shuo one after another. Furthermore, they were all bombarded at the same time. The new domain of divinity barely managed to hold on for a few dozen seconds before it finally failed to completely protect Han Shuo. However, it had already helped Han Shuo absorb most of the impact. Han Shuo released all the demonic yuan in his body to form a thin layer of protective shield to defend against the subsequent attacks. When his demonic yuan was about to be exhausted, Han Shuo began to utilize the energy of the demon generals and Cauldron Spirit. One demon general after another was burned away in exchange for Han Shuo's right to live. Time passed by silently. Han Shuo forgot about everything else. He mechanically utilized all the demonic yuan in his body to form the strongest protective shield. In the end, even the protective shield cracked and shattered. His body was also bleeding profusely. At this moment, his inner demon attacked him. He suddenly discovered that he had once again become that ignorant and incompetent otaku on Earth. He was powerless and powerless. He could only helplessly face his boring life. At this moment, those thousands of lives that had died by his hand had turned into malicious spirits. He had no power to resist. His body was being torn apart, his flesh was being gnawed away. The unbearable pain was magnified infinitely in his mind. He could even feel that even his soul was being burned by the flames of hell. The feeling of losing his power was very despairing. He felt powerless in the face of the attacks from the malicious spirits. The fear that he had not felt for a long time once again struck him. No, I am no longer that useless otaku. I have power. I am the reborn Han Shuo. Even if I don't have the slightest bit of power, I will not continue to face everything passively. Han Shuo shouted in his mind. Having lost his power, he began to crazily use his hands to tear apart the malicious spirits. He used his teeth and his body to attack them. He used the most primitive and barbaric methods to deal with those malicious spirits. He became crazier than anyone else, more like a malicious spirit than those malicious spirits. Gradually, Han Shuo suddenly discovered that those malicious spirits were beginning to fear him. The power that he had lost was also slowly returning. After an unknown period of time, Han Sho, who had fallen into a strange state, suddenly woke up. A blinding light shone directly on his body. This light was not like the powerful light from before. Instead, it was warm and comfortable. It was not a threat at all. His surroundings suddenly became silent. There was not a single sound. He raised his head to look at the sky. The sky was clear and boundless. There were no more terrifying powers waiting to be unleashed. There were no more oppressive dark clouds, and there were no more dense heavenly lightning. Looking around, Han Sho discovered that he was on top of the raised Empyrean peak. There were corpses everywhere around him. Not far away, Salus looked at him with a complicated expression. He seemed to be hesitating whether or not to rush over now. "Salus, we will meet again," Han Sho said to Salus with a gentle smile on his face. After that, a cloud of blood mist enveloped him. With a flash of blood light, he disappeared from the spot. Chapter 862. The same thing happened again. Salus, who had been hesitating whether he should make a move or not, watched as Han Sho vanished into thin air just like little skull Han Hao. Salus was burning with rage. In order to deal with Han Sho, Salus had absorbed the soul energies of his believers from several material planes. This was the method of killing the goose that laid the golden eggs to increase his strength by leaps and bounds. Now that Han Sho had escaped at the most crucial moment, his believers could be said to have died 100 times over. Although Salus was displeased when Han Hao escaped from his grasp, he wasn't as frustrated as he was now. After all, Han Hao's strength was limited. Even if Han Hao escaped, he wouldn't be a threat to Salus. But Han Sho was different. Not only did he massacre the Empyrean Peak, he slaughtered many of Salus' followers and nearly destroyed the entire Empyrean Peak. Most importantly, Salus felt a strong sense of threat from Han Sho. From Salus's point of view, as long as Han Sho didn't die, he wouldn't be able to capture Han Sho the next time they met. A person who could turn the entire fringe upside down must not live for too long. Looking at the devastated Empyrean Peak, Salus's anger soared to the heavens. Corpses were scattered all over the ground at the foot of the peak. Those were his most trusted followers. Yet they were caught up in a wave of unprecedented attacks and suffered heavy casualties. With just this one incident, Salus's strength in the fringe had plummeted. He was no longer as powerful as the other 4 sovereigns. His eyes glinted fiercely. Salus's face darkened as he thought for a moment. Then, he gathered his followers who were lucky enough to escape and ordered, "Search for this person's whereabouts at all costs. Everything related to him. I want to know everything about him. No matter where he is hiding, find him and report to me. This person must die." Salus understood that if Han Sho didn't die, he would become a great threat to him. After instructing his subordinates, Salus hesitated for a moment before deciding to discuss this matter with the other sovereigns. From Salus's point of view, the other sovereigns wouldn't want a new troublemaker to appear in the fringe. As long as Han Sho wasn't a threat to the other sovereigns, they wouldn't care about him. But when Han Sho's existence threatened the interests of the 5 sovereigns, the other sovereigns would surely intervene. Salus made up his mind and looked around at the miserable state of the deity Sky Peak. Then, he transformed into a bolt of lightning and disappeared into the distance. In a quagmire thousands of miles away from the God of Heaven Peak, Han Sho was completely powerless. He was curled up in the depths of the quagmire, which was overgrown with weeds. The demonic tribulation had consumed most of the energy in his body. His demonic body had already been injured and his defenses had been broken. With the demonic tribulation's attack and the blood escape art, his injuries had worsened. Not only was his body weak, but his spirit was also dispirited. Han Sho slowly merged his entire body into the quagmire. With great effort, he shrunk to the bottom of the quagmire, concealed his consciousness, and became one with the quagmire. New insights emerged in his consciousness. Marvelous runes were imprinted into his mind. Han Shu knew that he had made a breakthrough in his state of mind. Although the demonic yuan in his demonic body was incomparably weak, it seemed to have undergone an earth-shattering transformation. The weak strands of demonic yuan were extremely tenacious, igniting his body like a spark. Every time the demonic yuan circulated a full cycle in his body with great difficulty, it would become a little thicker, and his heavily injured demonic body would recover some of its wounds. Relaxing his mind and forgetting everything, Han Shu stayed at the bottom of the quagmire. He didn't think about anything else. His consciousness was empty. He was recovering his body in this wonderful state. What? In the underground palace, one of the sovereigns, Asura, was astonished. My lord, the Empyrean Peak is being rebuilt. I heard that Salus suffered great losses. He lost 500 to 600 of his subordinates. Among them, there are more than a dozen high gods. Luolong, who stood before Asura, said in a solemn and respectful manner. The underground palace was located under a mountain range not far from the amphilas at the center of the fringe. It was the personal palace of Asura, who cultivated in the energy of earth. Inside the palace were Asura's trusted subordinates. Upon receiving the news, Luolong rushed to the underground palace to meet Asura. Is it really Brian's doing? Asura couldn't believe it. The last time I met him, I carefully sensed him, but I didn't feel that he had such strength. Luolong put on a bitter smile and said, I can't be wrong. Salus' subordinates are searching for him all over the fringe. I also heard that Salus has gone to Sovereign Wasis and Sovereign Log to look for Brian. It seems that Salus doesn't want Brian to live in the fringe any longer. Asura bunched his brows and pondered for a moment before he instructed Luolong. Search for Brian's whereabouts as well. Also, keep Brian's subordinates alive. But don't take sides. We will remain neutral and watch from the sidelines. Rest assured, my lord, I know what to do, nodded Luolong and left respectfully. After Luolong left, Asura mumbled to himself. Brian, oh Brian, if you really are that capable, what should I do? Should I help you or kill you? The news that the Empyrean Peak was invaded and almost razed to the ground spread across the fringe in a very short period of time. For a moment, Tanai and the Windlings became the busiest people in the fringe. The leaders of all the major powers were willing to spend huge sums of money to find out the truth. However, for some reason, the Windlings, who were usually willing to divulge their mother's secrets for the sake of crystal coins, immediately shut their mouths when they heard someone asking about the Empyrean Peak. They did not dare to say anything about the Empyrean Peak. The more they behaved like that, the more curious they became. The wretched state of the Empyrean Peak could be seen even from afar. Some things just couldn't be hidden. The ferocious gods of the fringe were constantly exchanging information. Brian had become the most discussed name in the fringe. In a valley filled with rocks, Polo learned the news from his subordinate, Kodiak. Polo wore a complicated look on his face. He too found it hard to believe. He had learned about the relationship between Han Hao and Han Shu through various sources. When he learned that Han Shu dared to invade the Empyrean Peak by himself and that he was able to leave the Empyrean Peak alive after causing such an earth-shattering incident, he began to seriously examine the capabilities of both Han Shu and Han Hao. Who's there? Kodiak cried out in surprise. He vigilantly looked at the tunnel leading into the valley. A cold and detached figure slowly appeared. Han Hao scanned the surroundings and finally fixed his eyes on Polo. He did not say a word. Kodiak was startled when he saw that it was Han Hao. He recalled the news that had recently spread across the fringe. Kodiak respectfully bowed at Han Hao and gestured for Han Hao to enter the valley. The gazes of Polo's followers when they looked at Han Hao were also filled with respect. For the past 2 years, Han Hao and his god hunters had been wreaking havoc all over the fringe. They had become the fastest-growing faction in the fringe. After killing Salus' late-stage high god follower a few months ago, Han Hao had become the most powerful god hunter faction in the fringe. Compared to the current Polo, Han Hao and his followers were much more prestigious. As god hunters themselves, it was only natural that Polo's followers would treat Han Hao with respect. Little Skull Han Hao, who had just escaped from Salus, had been frantically hunting down lone gods in the fringe. He had absorbed the energy from their bodies to replenish the energy he had used to cast sanguine disassembly. After a period of recuperation, not only had Han Hao fully recovered, but his strength had also improved. Through his followers scattered across the fringe, Han Hao learned that Han Hao was at the Empyrean Peak. Unlike Han Shuo, who was worried that Han Hao would be killed by Salus, Han Hao was not worried about Han Shuo in the slightest. He did not take the matter to heart. From what little skull Han Hao could tell, if even he could escape from Salus using sanguine disassembly, it would be much easier for Han Shuo, whose cultivation in demonic arts was much more profound than his, to escape from Salus's pursuit. From what his followers had told him, little skull Han Hao could vaguely guess what had happened to his father, Han Shuo. He believed that Han Shuo must be in a state of mental stability. Once Han Shuo reappeared, the power structure of the fringe would be shattered. Before that happened, Han Hao planned to help Han Shuo clear the path ahead of time. As Polo was a rather powerful god hunter, he became the first person Han Hao paid a visit to. When Polo saw that it was Han Hao, he was startled. He laughed and said, "Haha, what brings you here?" Han Hao calmly looked at Polo. He raised the 3-meter-long bone spear in his hand, pointed it at Polo, and asked, "Polo, have you considered my proposal?" Polo stared blankly for a moment before he recalled that Han Hao had asked him to submit to him. At that time, Polo said that he would consider it, but he did not give an answer. He did not expect that Han Hao would mention it again. "I haven't thought it through," replied Polo smilingly. Han Hao fixed his bewitching purple demon eye on Polo. In an eerie and cold voice he said, "Polo, from today onwards, I will rule over all god hunters in the fringe. And you will be the first. If you don't submit, I will kill you today." Upon finishing those words, Han Hao raised his head and let out a shrill howl. One after another, shadowy figures flew over and suddenly swarmed into the valley where Polo was. Han Hao's subordinates outnumbered Polo's, and they were much more well coordinated. Their faces were dark and their eyes were filled with bloodlust. As soon as Han Shuo gave the order, they would charge at Han Hao. It seemed that Han Hao did not intend to give Polo any time or opportunity to consider. "Han Hao, you want me to submit to you? Do you have the strength to suppress me?" Instead of getting angry, Polo laughed and coldly said, "Be it in the Fringe or the God Hunter Alliance, I, Polo, am more talented than you. What makes you think you can make me submit to you? 2 years ago, I couldn't suppress you. But today, if you don't submit to me, you will die," replied Han Hao calmly. He raised the 3-meter-long bone spear in his hand. Without wasting any time, he started killing Polo. Chapter 863. Polo cultivated in the Edict of Destruction and was a late-stage high god. He was a well-known figure among the god hunters in the fringe. Even in the God Hunter Alliance, his prestige was higher than that of Han Hao's. Given his status and strength, it was only natural that he would not submit to someone else, especially when he did not know whether or not Han Hao had the ability to take him down. After Han Hao killed that late-stage high god of Salus, his overall strength had reached a whole new level. Not only did Salus fail to kill him, Han Hao was even more motivated to devour experts to strengthen himself. After recuperating for a period of time, Han Hao was confident that he could defeat Polo. Han Hao had never been a long-winded person, and he knew very well the rules of god hunters. He knew that if he wished to convince Polo, he must utterly crush him in terms of strength. He must let Polo know that his days of tyrannizing the god hunters in the fringe were over. Han Shuo unfolded his bone spear. The aura of death and killing intent that soared to the sky fused together. An invisible ripple rapidly spread out from Han Shuo. Polo's face jolted and his face turned gloomy. It had been 2 years since they last met. Polo could sense that the current Han Hao was different from before. Both his aura and his eyes had become fiercer and sharper. His entire being resembled a sword of ice that glittered with cold light. He carried an overbearing and arrogant air. Not a single one of Polo's followers dared to act rashly without receiving orders from Han Hao. Around them, Han Hao's followers were looking at them with cold eyes. They were also waiting for Han Hao's order to attack. As soon as the aura of death and killing intent condensed, circles of ripples emerged from the tip of the bone spear. Each ripple was a boundary of death that rapidly took shape around Polo. Before Polo could react, Han Hao had gathered all the divine energy in his body into a single point, and with a flick of his jade-white arm, the bone spear was thrust at Polo. With a single thought, the other 7 bone spurs on his back whizzed out of his body. They formed a beautiful arc and shot toward Polo from 7 different directions like 7 meteors. The boundaries formed by Han Hao would not hinder the bone spears in the slightest. Instead, they would increase the power of the bone spears. Polo was caught off guard and had no choice but to defend himself. All of a sudden, a blinding light erupted around Polo. All of a sudden, all of the boundaries Han Hao had set up vanished. The bone spurs froze a few meters in front of Polo like an invisible cage, trapping him from afar. The god hunters in the vicinity knew that Han Hao and Polo had exchanged blows with each other in the intense light. But they did not know the outcome of the battle. They were all cautiously observing the two, keeping their guard up against the enemy's men, ready to strike at a moment's notice. Polo's followers were nervous because the number of god hunters Han Hao had brought with him was much greater than theirs. Moreover, they had heard of the ferocious nature of these god hunters. They knew that if Polo and Han Hao had a falling out, they would suffer the same fate as those who had been devoured by them. The divine energy in their bodies would be used to further enhance the god hunters. Han Hao wore a calm countenance. His eyes stared at Polo and he said, "Polo, the power structure in the fringe will be broken. Even if I don't kill you today, someone else will." Polo wore a complicated expression. He looked deeply at Han Hao and hesitated for a moment before he asked, "That Brian who destroyed Empyrean Peak and escaped from Salus alive, who is he to you?" Han Hao stared blankly for a moment. He hesitated for a moment before he waved his hand and created another barrier between the two. Then he answered, "He is my father." Polo was greatly astonished. He finally made up his mind. He forced a smile and nodded. "All right, I agree to your proposal." Han Hao nodded and removed the barrier. In front of everyone, he declared, "From today onwards, you and your men are under my control. Put away your weapons." Polo looked like he was about to cry as he ordered Kodiak's men. Polo did not have to say much to convince them that he had compromised. From today onwards, Han Hao and his god hunters would become a force that no one in the fringe would dare to belittle. Pandemonium. The 5 elite zombies, Romont, Rose, Zovik, and the others had gathered. The news that Han Shu had wreaked havoc on Empyrean Peak and killed many of Salus' followers had spread across the fringe. Luolong and Little Skull Han Hao had sent messengers to inform them of the news, warning them to be careful. During this period of time, Romont, Zovik, Goran, and the others had swept through a dozen or so forces of various sizes with the Pandemonium as the epicenter. Most of those forces were either killed or surrendered. They posed no threat to the Pandemonium. Just as they were about to go all out, the news that Han Shu had barged into Empyrean Peak all by himself reached them. Romont and Rose immediately gave up on their campaign against the fringe and summoned everyone back to the Pandemonium. They decided to hold back for the time being. Romont, Rose, Zovik, Goran, and Romont all wore solemn expressions. They did not know how they should deal with the current situation. Salus was a sovereign that everyone feared in the fringe. Now that Han Shu was missing, they did not know if the Pandemonium could survive until Han Shu returned. Salus followers have been searching for Master's whereabouts. Many of Salus spies have appeared in the vicinity of our Pandemonium. We have just swept through all the forces in the fringe. I don't think the existence of the Pandemonium can be kept a secret for long," said Zovik in annoyance. "Of course not. Given Salus' influence in the fringe, it won't be long before he brings his men here. Sai, should we disperse for now and regroup when we get news of Master?" Goran sighed helplessly. "We will not leave. It was not easy to set up the pandemonium. We will not allow it to be destroyed, Metal Elite Zombie of the 5 Elite Zombies said resolutely. Besides, all of you have underestimated the pandemonium. Father and I have spent so much effort to set up the pandemonium. It is not something you can imagine. Humph, even if Salus himself comes, he will have to pay a hefty price to breach the pandemonium. The 5 Elite Zombies and Han Shure had spent too much time and effort on the pandemonium. As direct participants in the project, they knew very well how terrifying the forces hidden in the pandemonium were. They were not even afraid of Salus, one of the 5 sovereigns of the Fringe. I believe in Master's power. Salus Empyrean Peak has been destroyed, and so many of his followers have been killed by Master. I reckon he won't be able to gather much strength anymore, said Romont, ever since he was transformed by Han Shure using demonic arts. He worshipped Han Shure from the bottom of his heart. Given Salus' influence in the Fringe, we won't be able to escape even if we leave the pandemonium. We might as well stay and gamble. I believe that once Master recovers, he will immediately rush back to the pandemonium. We just need to hold on until Master returns, suggested Zovik. Let's not leave the pandemonium. We will stay in Tanai for the time being, said Rose, who had been silent all this while. The 5 Elite Zombies, Romont, Zovik, and the others knew that Han Shure trusted Rose very much. They were all on friendly terms with Rose. Therefore, after hearing Rose's words, they stopped talking. It seemed that they had decided to follow Rose's suggestion. In the underground palace, Luolong once again reported to Asura, My lord, we have received news that Salus has learned of the existence and location of the pandemonium. Salus has begun gathering his forces and is planning to march towards the pandemonium. Asura was rather hesitant. After thinking for a moment, he asked Luolong, Is there any news that confirms that Brian is in Tanai? Luolong shook his head and replied, No. Ever since he mysteriously disappeared from the Empyrean Peak, there has been no news of him at all. Salus and the subordinates of the other sovereigns have combed the entire Fringe, but they have not found a single trace of him. That fella is really something. Asura nodded in admiration. After pondering for a moment, Asura said, You don't have to worry about the pandemonium. I will personally go and see what's going on there. Luolong was shocked. He did not expect that Asura would personally go to the pandemonium. After hesitating for a moment, Luolong asked, My lord, wouldn't you be making a mountain out of a molehill by going to the pandemonium? Asura shook his head smilingly and said, That fella, Brian, is worth a gamble. I will go to the pandemonium and see if his subordinates are worth my help. Luolong was even more curious, but he did not ask any more questions. He respectfully retreated. On the peak of a tall mountain northwest of the pandemonium, Salus' subordinates were gathering. Those on the Empyrean Peak were only a portion of Salus's subordinates. The rest of his subordinates were scattered across the Fringe. Although Salus had suffered a heavy blow, his forces were not completely wiped out. As one of the sovereigns of the Fringe, he was able to gather quite a number of his subordinates very quickly. In just a few days, the mountain had gathered 500 to 600 gods. These fierce gods who came from every corner of the Fringe had heard about the tragedy that happened on the Empyrean Peak. As Salus's subordinates, they had grown accustomed to riding roughshod over the Fringe. Now that the Empyrean Peak had been destroyed, it was not hard to imagine how angry and resentful they were. During this period of time, the Fringe had been talking about the Empyrean Peak. They could see from the gazes of others that they were rejoicing in their misfortune. Those who used to avoid them were no longer afraid of them. This made them realize how much Salus's downfall had affected them. Even if it wasn't for Salus's sake, they would destroy the pandemonium and kill Han Shure. They knew that this was the only way they could preserve their privileges in the Fringe. The Fringe was such a realistic place. One side's prosperity meant the other side's decline. Although Salus did not lose, the destruction of the Empyrean Peak and the survival of Han Shure made the Fringe feel that Salus was not as powerful as they had imagined. Half a month later, a bolt of lightning streaked across the sky. Salus finally appeared on the mountain peak. Chapter 864. My lord, you are finally here! The group of sovereigns knelt at Salus's feet respectfully. Even though the Empyrean Peak had been destroyed and Han Shuo had escaped their clutches, Salus was still the most terrifying existence in the fringe to these sovereigns. These sovereigns were used to riding roughshod over others in the name of Salus. They knew that their interests were closely tied to Salus's. As long as Salus remained standing, they would still be able to do as they pleased in the fringe. But once they lost Salus's protection, not only would they no longer be able to do as they pleased in the fringe, but they would also be hunted down by their former enemies and torn to shreds. What do you think? Asked Salus with a gloomy face. Recently, things had not been going well for him. The two sovereigns, Wasis and Log, were delighted to hear that his Empyrean Peak had been destroyed. Although they had reached an agreement verbally, it was hard to say whether or not the two sovereigns would keep their word. As one of the sovereigns of the fringe, he could not even protect his own base. He had become a laughingstock in an instant. Salus understood that only by uprooting Han Shuo and his forces and killing all of Han Shuo's men would he be able to wash away the humiliation of the Empyrean Peak. My lord, the pandemonium is shrouded in colorful miasma. We have been observing it for a long time, but we have not seen a single person emerge from it, replied one of Salus's subordinates respectfully. It seems that they are all in Tanai. Very good, we can take them all down in one fell swoop, snorted Salus coldly. His eyes flashed with lightning as he scanned the surroundings. He took in the expressions of nearly 1,000 of his subordinates and said, The Empyrean Peak's dignity has been challenged. Today, we will let everyone know the consequences of going against the Empyrean Peak. Salus waved his hand and commanded, Charge into the pandemonium. No matter who they are, kill them all. As soon as he finished speaking, Salus' subordinates immediately issued a command. One after another, they took to the skies and flew towards the pandemonium. As one of the sovereigns of the fringe, Salus naturally wouldn't be the first to act. In his opinion, other than Han Shuo, his subordinates should be able to handle the rest. Therefore, Salus remained silent with a gloomy face. It was only when all of his subordinates were charging towards the pandemonium that he turned into a bolt of lightning and followed them. Pandemonium, Tanai, the 5 elite zombies, Rose, Romont, Zovik, Goran, and the others wore grave expressions as they observed the situation outside the valley through an enormous magical mirror. Over the years, McKinley of Ethereal City had been sending many exquisite spatial artifacts to Han Shuo. This gigantic spatial refracting mirror was one of them. Through the spatial magic matrices set up on the mountains around the pandemonium, it could reflect the scenery of the surroundings into the mirror. Through the spatial refracting mirror, Tanai and the others could clearly see most of the scenery outside the pandemonium. Through the spatial refracting mirror, they could see a large number of figures flying towards the pandemonium. Each and every one of them had ferocious gazes. They were led by a few famous generals under Salus. Most of them possessed late-stage high god strength. In the void, an enormous figure surrounded by lightning bolts was coldly looking down at the pandemonium. It was none other than Salus of the 5 sovereigns. Apart from the other 4 sovereigns, there was no other power in the fringe that could contend against him. Even if the pandemonium's marvelous array was ignored, Salus's experts alone would be able to take down the pandemonium. Other than the 5 elite zombies, who knew how powerful the pandemonium was, the others, including Rose and Romont, wore grave faces. They had no idea how long the pandemonium would last. Don't worry, not even Salus will be able to break into the pandemonium, said the simple-minded Han Huo with a mischievous smile. He wasn't nervous in the slightest. He asked Han Mu smilingly, Littlewood, how many demonic formations do you think the first batch will be able to break through? Han Mu was wearing a lecherous look on his face. Through the spatial mirror, he was staring at those beautiful female subordinates of Salus. The corners of his mouth curled into a lewd smile. No one knew what kind of dirty thoughts were going through his mind. But when Han Huo asked, he replied impatiently, Who cares? Without Salus, they won't be able to break in. Zovik, Rose, and the others were stunned. They could not understand why the 5 elite zombies were so confident. From their point of view, no matter how miraculous the pandemonium was, it shouldn't be able to withstand the ferocious attacks of more than 1,000 gods. If they managed to break through, Tanai's army would be doomed. Don't worry. If they really manage to break into the pandemonium, I will lead you out of the pandemonium. Salus cultivates the power of lightning and can't go several hundred meters underground to hunt you down. I really don't know what you're afraid of. Han too glanced at the nervous people and gave them a reassuring grumpily. These experts more or less knew some of the miraculous techniques of the 5 elite zombies. They felt much better after hearing Han Tu's assurance and kept quiet. The 5 elite zombies looked relaxed. They didn't seem nervous at all. Instead, they were constantly teasing each other as though they didn't care about their enemies at all. Under the influence of the 5 elite zombies, Rose, Zovik, and the others gradually calmed down. Perhaps it was because they heard Han Tu's assurance. They felt a lot more at ease. However, their gazes were still fixed on the spatial refracting mirror in front of them, paying close attention to the incoming enemies. The first wave of enemies soon arrived. Salus' subordinates had lived in the fringe for many years. Not all of them were mediocre. They knew how to probe the pandemonium's situation first. The first to make a move weren't the most powerful subordinates under Salus, but the small characters who were usually nameless. In uncertain situations, they were often used as cannon fodder to charge at the forefront. Back in Tanai, the reason why those foppishus were willing to pay 500,000 black crystal coins each to follow Little Skull Han Hao and not Salus, one of the 5 sovereigns, was because they knew that if they followed Salus, they would be used as cannon fodder at crucial moments. There was a price to pay for everything. Those cannon fodder who hadn't been with Salus for very long and weren't particularly outstanding in strength knew their mission. Following their leader's orders, a dozen or so of them descended into Pandemonium Tanai without much hesitation. Thick, colorful miasma hovered above the pandemonium. Almost all of the miasma contained deadly poison. The cannon fodder had the awareness of being cannon fodder. They had brought along antidotes and divine energy to protect themselves from the miasma because they knew that the miasma wasn't as beautiful as it appeared to be. But how could an ordinary person withstand the miasma deployed by Han Shu and the 5 elite zombies? Would elite zombie, as a spirit of life, had spent a great deal of effort to construct the miasma for Han Shu using poisonous plants, which allowed Han Shu to mix acid, corpse, and phosphorus toxins into the miasma. Not only did the miasma prevent outsiders from peeking at it, it also became the first line of defense. Although those cannon fodder who knew their mission had done everything they could to prevent the miasma from invading, it was to no avail. As soon as they entered the miasma, they discovered that the multicolored miasma contained toxins that were beyond their comprehension. It was on a completely different level from the toxins they usually found deep in the mountains. The defensive antidotes and protective armors they had smeared on their bodies didn't seem to have any effect at all. Their bodies started to rot. Some started to bleed from their orifices while others started to feel numb and dizzy. They had lost all their strength in an instant. The first batch of cannon fodder sent into the pandemonium vanished without a trace. It was as though the first batch of cannon fodder had sunk into the ocean. Not simple indeed! A burly man shouted with a sullen face. There wasn't the slightest trace of grief or anger on his face after the death of his subordinates. It was as though he didn't care about the lives of his subordinates at all. An old man with messy shoulder-length hair said with a frown, "Wind elemental gods, let's work together and disperse the poisonous miasma." As soon as he said this, the gods who cultivated in the element of wind began to use the divine power in their bodies to gather the element of wind. Strong winds howled as tornadoes took shape and began to wreak havoc in the colorful miasma. Salus had a few dozen of his wind energy followers, including 5 or 6 high gods. With them working together, the entire pandemonium was shrouded in raging winds. Hurricanes and tornadoes appeared one after another, swirling around the pandemonium. However, using some unknown method, the thick miasma that enveloped the pandemonium seemed to be attracted by a magnet. Although the miasma kept drifting in the air, it remained above the pandemonium. The hurricanes and tornadoes blew the miasma away. But as soon as the hurricanes disappeared, the miasma seemed to be attracted by something in the pandemonium, and would gather above Tanai. It was as though water from a high place would naturally flow to a low place. My father spent 2 months meticulously collecting the miasma from different regions and used the universal restoration technique to gather the demonic miasma. It is not something that can be blown away by a mere breeze. Hanhua sneered proudly. We should teach them a lesson, don't you think so, Littlewood? Said Han-Tu to Han-Mu smilingly. Of course. It's time. Han-Mu burst into laughter. No one knew what he had done, but the branches and leaves of the towering trees in the pandemonium suddenly shook violently. The toxic miasma that had gathered above the pandemonium was no longer concentrated in the sky above the pandemonium. Instead, it started to spread out uncontrollably. With the pandemonium as the center, the miasma spread in all directions. The hurricanes and tornadoes created by the gods of wind under Salus were unable to control the direction of the miasma. Instead, they sped up the miasma. Not good! Retreat! Shouted the old man with disheveled hair. He hastily ordered his followers to retreat. However, the miasma spread rapidly under the influence of the wind energy. As soon as he finished speaking, many of Salus' followers were engulfed by the miasma. Chapter 865. All kinds of toxins in the miasma cloud were pervasive and corrosive. In an extremely short period of time, the invaders at the outer perimeter of the pandemonium were corroded into skeletons. The invaders bled from their 7 orifices. The colorful miasma contained within the miasma cloud was made from all sorts of deadly poisons. As a cultivator of demonic arts, Han Shuo was very familiar with such insidious methods. With the assistance of Wood Elite Zombie and Cauldron Spirit and the Cauldron of Myriad Demon, Han Shuo managed to refine a miasma cloud that no one in this world had ever seen. Except for those high god experts who had extremely tough divine bodies and who had anticipated this situation in advance, those mid-gods who were engulfed by the miasmic miasma and poisonous gas, almost all of them would die. Only those high god experts who had extremely tough divine bodies and had divine energy spread throughout their bodies were able to withstand the miasmic miasma. In the blink of an eye, the miasma cloud had killed 50 to 60 of Salus's mid-gods. The invaders who were close to the pandemonium retreated far away in fear. The few high gods who managed to escape from the miasma cloud had exhausted a significant amount of divine energy. Their faces were filled with fear. Tanai and the 5 elite zombies couldn't help but chuckle sinisterly. Well done, Littlewood. You are indeed a cunning fella. You even made use of those idiots' wind energy. Without the help of wind energy, the miasma cloud wouldn't have been able to spread so quickly. Hanhua laughed heartily. He seemed extremely excited. Father had long anticipated that the enemies would use the energy of wind to disperse the poisonous miasma. Therefore, he specially asked me to add an extra layer to the miasma so that we can use the energy of wind to help us deal with them, said Han-Mu. He did not claim credit for the plan. Instead, he pointed out that it was Han Shuo's idea to come up with this vicious plan. The 5 elite zombies discussed the uses of the miasma cloud in a lively manner. They all looked relaxed and confident after winning the first battle. Rose, Zovik, and the others, who were originally anxious, were shocked to see so many of the invaders die before they could even break through the first layer of the miasma. It was only at this moment that they began to see the power of the pandemonium's messy formation seriously. They suddenly felt that with the pandemonium around, the invaders would definitely suffer unimaginable losses. Rose suddenly felt relieved. She was even more impressed by Han Shuo. He wasn't in the pandemonium, but he was able to keep so many fringe dwellers out of the fringe with just a few years of preparation. This wasn't something an ordinary person could do. From Rose's point of view, Han Shuo would definitely become a legend in the fringe. On a steep slope outside the pandemonium, a figure was observing the changes in the pandemonium from afar. It was the other sovereign, Asura. Asura's face was filled with shock. He waved his hand and a cloud of poisonous miasma floated over his palm. After carefully sensing the miasma cloud, Asura was even more astonished. He did not sense the usual toxins on the miasma cloud. Instead, he discovered that the miasma cloud was filled with multicolored gases. Each gas had its own unique function. All kinds of bizarre toxins were mixed together in an unimaginable way to form a special miasma cloud that he had never seen before. Asura knew that the miasma cloud contained extremely terrifying toxins. Even with his overgod strength, he couldn't completely isolate the toxins. He had to use a trace of divine energy to resist the toxins. It was evident how powerful the miasma cloud was. Asura looked at the pandemonium with a complicated expression. He mumbled to himself, "Brian, oh Brian, who are you?" "Lord Salus, what should we do?" asked the old man after retreating from the center of the pandemonium. He looked at Salus with a pitiful and helpless face. Salus had seen what happened just now. The miasma cloud contained terrifying toxins and was impervious to wind energy. They had no idea how they were going to break into the pandemonium. "Trash!" shouted Salus furiously. He thought that he would be able to easily kill Tanai and his men by leading a group of loyal subordinates into the pandemonium. Little did he expect that he would lose dozens of his subordinates before they could even break through the miasma cloud. If news of this were to spread, wouldn't Salus's reputation plummet to the bottom of the valley? Would he be laughed at by everyone? The old man hung his head low. His subordinates also looked dispirited and pitiful. They knew very well that Salus did not have a good temper. He would kill anyone he disliked, not even sparing his own men. When Salus was enraged, the wisest thing to do was to speak as little as possible. Roared Salus. He swept his cold gaze across his subordinates. In the past, he would have killed one or two of them to vent his anger. But this time, Salus endured it. He knew that things were different now. His reputation in the fringe had plummeted. No outsider would be willing to join him for the time being. To establish a foothold in the fringe, one must have sufficient strength. Now that every one of his subordinates was dead, he could no longer kill them whenever he wanted. "Back off, all of you! I'll break this poison cloud barrier!" Sokka snorted coldly in exasperation at their failure to meet his expectations. He unfolded his domain of divinity. The element of lightning from all directions frantically converged towards Salus. In a short time, Salus was surrounded by flashes of lightning and thunderclaps. "It seems that Salus' strength hasn't regressed. That Brian does have some tricks up his sleeve to be able to escape from him." Asura put on a grave face as he carefully sensed the element of lightning in the air. He could roughly guess Salus' strength from the element of lightning in the air. He could tell that Salus' strength didn't regress due to a setback in his cultivation like the rumors said. Salus' strength didn't regress because of a setback in his cultivation. With that thought in mind, Asura valued Han Sho even more. If Han Sho could easily escape from Salus, then even if Asura himself or another sovereign came to deal with Han Sho in the future, they might not be able to kill Han Sho. This meant that they would not be able to eliminate the root of the problem. No matter what, Han Sho would be a huge threat to them. After weighing the pros and cons, Asura carefully recalled the information he received about Han Sho from the City of Shadows. He made a wise decision. He would never make an enemy out of Han Sho. While Asura made a decision that would make him extremely happy in the future, Salus gathered the energy of lightning in the sky and started bombarding the pandemonium with devastating lightning. Salus' method was very simple. He ignored the chaotic formations and boundaries in the pandemonium, and directed the energy of lightning in the air to bombard the pandemonium with the most ferocious lightning. Although simple, it was the most direct and most effective way to deal with the pandemonium. Bolts of lightning tore through the void and thunder rumbled incessantly towards the pandemonium. For a moment, earth-shattering explosions could be heard from every corner of the pandemonium. If it wasn't for the poisonous miasma that shrouded the pandemonium, Salus wouldn't have acted so quickly. If he had allowed his subordinates to attack the pandemonium, Tanai demonic formations would have unleashed even more terrifying power. However, the presence of the poisonous miasma had instilled fear in his subordinates. They were powerless and did not dare to take another step forward. Therefore, they placed all their hopes on Salus. As such, Salus had no choice but to take action himself. As the sovereign of the Fringe, he was already feeling very aggrieved that he had to take action when the pandemonium had just begun. Damn it, this Salus is way too fast. I haven't even had the chance to have some fun yet. I have already prepared so many demonic formations for his subordinates. Why is he so excited? Cursed Hanhua. He felt that Salus was being too unreasonable. Zovik put on a bitter smile and said, "It's because the poisonous miasma is too powerful. They can't blast it away and they don't want to die. They won't dare to attack us anymore." "Why didn't you say so earlier?" Cursed Han Mu. "No matter what, we still have to kill as many of his subordinates as we can." I got it. We can pretend that a part of the pandemonium has been destroyed and lure them in. Ha ha, Han Mu, you are truly cunning. That's for the best, laughed Hanhua. While chuckling mischievously, Han Mu once again made his move. He used his soul to communicate with the towering ancient trees that served as the special formation cores of the demonic formations. As though they were highly intelligent lifeforms, they wriggled their branches and shook their dense foliage. Salus's bolts of heavenly lightning struck the pandemonium, causing earth-shattering explosions. However, the poisonous miasma that shrouded the pandemonium never dissipated. This made Salus even more furious. He spared no effort in gathering the energy of lightning in the vicinity. Suddenly, for some unknown reason, the poisonous miasma that filled the sky above the pandemonium seemed to be sucked in by an enormous suction force. It was sucked into the densely packed holes in the nearby mountains of Tanai. Salus stared blankly for a moment before he laughed sinisterly and shouted, "Kill your way into Tanai. The energy towers and barriers that formed the poisonous miasma have been destroyed by the energy of lightning. Enter the pandemonium and kill all of them. Don't worry, that Brian fellow won't be able to escape from me this time." Salus had absolute confidence in his own strength. In his opinion, Tanai's defenses were very limited. No barriers could withstand the full power of an expert with over-god strength. Therefore, he decisively ordered his subordinates to attack with all their might. Just like how Salus trusted himself, his subordinates also trusted Salus. For so many years, Salus had run amok in the Fringe. No matter how arrogant or how strange the barriers were, none of them could withstand his lightning attacks. The sudden disappearance of the miasma seemed to prove that Salus's judgment was correct. The high gods who had suffered in the miasma had been waiting for this opportunity. Without hesitation, they ordered their subordinates to attack with all their might. They themselves took the lead and flew towards the pandemonium from all directions. Chapter 866. Apart from the poisonous miasma that lingered in the air all year round, Tanai was also filled with all kinds of deadly demonic formations. Even if Salus were to venture deep into the pandemonium, he would not be able to come out in a short time. His subordinates would definitely die if they entered the pandemonium. Good! Good! You've come at the right time! Han Mu let out a strange laugh. Haha, Salus is too confident in his own strength. Does he really think that there's no defense that can't be destroyed by him? Han Tu sneered as he stared at Salus, who had stopped attacking the spatial mirror. Salus, who had been gathering lightning energy to bombard the pandemonium, immediately stopped when he noticed that the miasma cloud that had enveloped the valley had disappeared. He looked down coldly at the buildings in the valley and ordered his subordinates to raise the pandemonium to the ground. With the disappearance of the miasma, the pandemonium seemed to be exposed before their eyes. Many tall black stone buildings stood tall in the deep valley. Towering trees grew all around the valley. The valley was decorated with lush greenery. It was a tranquil, and otherworldly place. From Salus's point of view, without the protection of the poisonous miasma cloud, The valley below was clearly exposed under the clear sky. There were also no complicated boundaries or energy towers everywhere. Therefore, even if the valley still had any defensive power, it should not be able to stop them. All signs pointed to the fact that the pandemonium had lost the protection of the miasma cloud. It was like a naked beauty that was at the mercy of anyone who wanted to take advantage of it. Another reason why Salus did not attack immediately was that he was wary of Han Shuo. The scene of Han Shuo undergoing his demonic tribulation on the Empyrean Peak had left a deep impression on him. Salus needed to conserve his energy to deal with Han Shuo, who might be hiding in Tanai. Salus's subordinates descended into the pandemonium one after another. However, before they could reach the bottom of the valley, they suddenly realized that the scenery had changed. The valley had suddenly turned hazy. The clear view of the bottom of the valley was like a mirage. You could see it from afar, but when you tried to get close, you would realize that it was just an illusion. As a matter of fact, the pandemonium was indeed just an illusory formation. Those who didn't know the depths of the illusory formation would be able to see the entire valley from the outside. But if they were to enter the valley, they would discover that what they saw was completely different. One by one, Salus's men fell to the bottom of the valley, and suddenly realized that they had lost their way. There was a chilly wind blowing around them, and a soul-stirring howling sound lingered in their ears. In an instant, they found themselves in a completely unfamiliar space, and they couldn't see their comrades clearly at all. There were also some people who suddenly found that the bushes were entangling them crazily the moment they reached the bottom of the valley. The leaves were as sharp as knives and had an emerald luster. It seemed that they were also dipped in poison. There were also some who found themselves in the eye of a raging storm. There were people who looked exactly like them, and were attacking them in a frenzy. Those who didn't have a strong will would immediately break down. Many of them couldn't withstand the bizarre pressure, and would lose their sense of self and sink into oblivion. Many strange demonic formations activated as soon as someone entered the valley. Those subordinates of Salus who entered the valley were all trapped by the demonic formations. Facing the strange attack methods that were different from this universe, many of them couldn't adapt to it. The demonic formations took advantage of their weakness and killed them in an instant. Mournful wails of agony could be heard from the bottom of the pandemonium. Those who heard them would feel their blood run cold. Ha ha! The 5 elite zombies were rocking back and forth in laughter. They were extremely pleased to see those who fell into the demonic formations being killed. Rose, Roman, Zovik, and the others watched the visitors who fell into the demonic formation being killed by all kinds of strange powers through the space mirror in front of them. Their expressions were extremely interesting. "Master's means are truly beyond our imagination!" exclaimed Romont. His admiration for Han Shuo was growing. "It seems that our worries were unfounded. Hee, I didn't expect this place to be so dangerous. It seems that in the future, as long as we return to Tanai, we won't have to worry about being hunted down," said Goran smilingly. He was no longer as nervous as before. "With this, Salus will have even fewer subordinates to use. I reckon that after this battle, Salus will be greatly weakened. Even if he wins, he will be the weakest among the 5 sovereigns in the fringe. Haha, serves him right for offending his lordship," said the shifty-eyed Zovik with a mischievous grin. Through the magical mirror in front of them, they could clearly see what was happening in every corner of the pandemonium. Inside the pandemonium, the followers of Salus were being slaughtered one after another. Even high god experts couldn't withstand the bizarre attacks of the demonic formations. Most of the time, they would lose control of their minds and start attacking in a frenzy. What are those people doing?" asked Rose puzzledly. She pointed at Salus' subordinates who had fallen into an illusion and were madly attacking the air. "Why are they killing each other?" Golan was also a little puzzled. In the other magic formation, the subordinates of Salus all looked bitter and hateful. Inside, they were killing each other. After a while, 20 people came in, but only 6 of them were still fighting each other. As they weren't in the demonic formation, They couldn't understand what those people were doing through the space mirror. This is a power that confuses the mind. If you don't enter, you will never understand what they are doing, said Han Mu proudly. He smilingly said to them, after today's matter is over, you can enter and have some fun. Then, you will know why they are going crazy. Forget it. Just looking at their actions is enough to make my scalp tingle. If I am careless and kill all my subordinates, I will die of regret. Gorin was all smiles and waved his hands. After witnessing the evilness and strangeness of the pandemonium, he didn't dare to enter recklessly. Haha, Gorin, at least you know what's good for you, teased Zovik. I just don't want to die without knowing why, replied Gorin with a bitter smile. Gorin wasn't lying at all. Those who died in the illusory formation didn't know who killed them. Perhaps it was their best friend or even their relative who killed them. It was indeed a terrible tragedy. While the 5 elite zombies in the pandemonium looked relaxed, Asura, who was secretly observing the situation in the pandemonium, was getting more and more amazed. Although Asura was some distance away, he could see the general situation in Tanai. Salah's subordinates that fell to the bottom of the pandemonium were killed by all kinds of mystical energies. Although Asura was one of the 5 sovereigns of the Fringe, he didn't understand the mysteries of demonic arts from another world. Everything in Tanai was so mysterious and unfathomable to him. No matter how carefully he observed, he couldn't see a single clue. The only thing he could tell was that the pandemonium was a tragedy that was happening all the time. The shrill screams were like a symphony of death, playing all over Tanai. The more Asura observed and learned about the pandemonium, the more he admired Han Shuo. He knew that even the underground palace he had spent 1,000 years building did not have such a bizarre and unfathomable defensive power. Han Shuo, on the other hand, had only been in the Fringe for a few years. Yet, in such a short time, Han Shuo had established a foothold in the pandemonium and turned it into a place of great danger. This proved that Han Shuo had an extremely mysterious barrier protecting him. Asura made up his mind that he must not make an enemy out of Han Shuo. At this critical moment, he had to find a way to express goodwill to Han Shuo. If Asura could see the changes at the bottom of the pandemonium, naturally, the other sovereign, Salus, could also see that something was amiss. Salus, who had just relaxed for a moment, didn't pay much attention to the first screams of his subordinates. He thought that it was normal to have casualties at the bottom of the pandemonium. Gradually, the screams grew louder and louder. It was as though someone was dying at every corner of the pandemonium. In this way, Salus had no choice but to look at the situation at the bottom of the valley again. Then, he discovered that the bottom of the valley was filled with many unknown forces at some point in time. Those unknown forces were arranged in a special way, forming many wonderful attacks that were quickly killing his subordinates who had fallen into the valley. Before he could relax, Salus turned pale with fright. By then, many of his subordinates had already entered the pandemonium. He couldn't bombard the pandemonium with his lightning energy. Salus was furious. He roared in the sky above the pandemonium. Everyone, get out of here! However, it was easy to enter the pandemonium, but difficult to leave. Those subordinates of Salus who had easily entered the pandemonium were trapped by all sorts of demonic formations. They couldn't break free from the demonic formations. Some of them had lost their minds and were fighting with themselves. They couldn't even hear Salus' shouts. Therefore, although Salus was shouting in the sky, none of his subordinates could break free from the demonic formations. They were still wailing like ghosts and howling like wolves. The death toll was increasing at a rate of 1 every few minutes. The bottom of the pandemonium was now littered with corpses. Salus had no choice but to personally enter the pandemonium and destroy the demonic formations one after another. After all, he was a powerhouse with the power of an overgod. When Salus charged into the center of the demonic formation, while covered in lightning, the demonic formation's power was unable to break through the defenses of the lightning power in his body. They were unable to cause any substantial damage to Salus. However, those demonic formations that could confuse one's mind were equally effective against Salus. They instantly pulled Salus into an illusion. However, as an over-god, Salus had cultivated his mind to a higher level than his subordinates. His divine soul was also different from that of an average high god. He broke free from the demonic formations in a very short time and destroyed everything in sight. In just a short while, the 3 demonic formations had stopped functioning. It seems that it's my turn now. Asura, who had been observing from the dark, smiled when he saw that Salus had finally gone all out. He flew towards the pandemonium. Chapter 867. As one of the overlords of the Fringe, Salus possessed formidable strength. Of all the demonic formations in the pandemonium, only a few could truly harm him. As soon as Salus entered the pandemonium, he managed to destroy 3 demonic formations with his formidable strength. However, it wasn't that easy for Salus to destroy the entire pandemonium. When he was trapped in a formation that was controlled by the 5 elite zombies and Han Shui using the 5 high god demon heads and cauldron spirit, he immediately felt that he could no longer use the element of lightning between heaven and earth as he pleased. The elemental energies in Tanai were much denser than those in other regions. Salus immediately sensed it the moment he entered the pandemonium. That was why he was able to use more of his lightning energy to destroy everything in his sight. When he sensed a wave of marvelous energy fluctuation and the 5 energies continuously roamed around him, dispersing all the element of lightning in the vicinity, Salus immediately knew that he was in trouble. Unable to use Tanai's lightning energy, Salus had no choice but to use the divine energy in his body to defend himself. He discovered that he was in a completely different dimension. Many attacks that he had never seen before were crashing against him like 1,000 tidal waves. In this isolated dimension, Salus couldn't sense the auras of his subordinates, or see what was happening outside. He could only passively use the energy in his body to defend against the bombardment of the elemental energies, consuming the energy in his body to protect his divine body and divine soul from harm. Asura, who was about to attack Salus, suddenly discovered that Salus wasn't invincible in Tanai. Looking down from above, he discovered that Salus was suddenly sitting cross-legged in a region of blurred light. Salus had a grave expression on his face as though he was in trouble. Asura was shocked. He didn't expect that the pandemonium could make Salus feel like he was facing a formidable foe. Asura wasn't in a hurry to attack. He once again hid in the dark and carefully observed Tanai's situation. Salus has fallen into the spirit-draining formation. The yuan energy in the pandemonium can be used to continuously deplete Salus's divine energy. The yuan energy has drowned him and he has to constantly use his divine energy to defend himself, shouted Han Mu coldly. More than half of Salus's subordinates will die before he can break free. Those who dare to cause trouble in the pandemonium will have to pay the price in blood, said Hanhua. Han Jin softly sighed and said to Rose and the others, "Let's get ready. It seems that we really need to evacuate Tanai. Sai, I wonder how Father is doing. Why hasn't he returned yet? Isn't Salus trapped? Why do we have to leave?" asked Rose, puzzled. Yeah. Look at Salus's solemn face. He seems very cautious. We might be able to trap him forever, said Roma to Han Jin. If the pandemonium had existed for hundreds or even thousands of years, Salus wouldn't be able to break free once he's trapped. Unfortunately, the pandemonium has only been built for 2 years. The yuan energy accumulated in the pandemonium is too little. The formation is using the yuan energy accumulated in the pandemonium to deplete the divine energy in Salus's body. Unfortunately, the yuan energy accumulated in the past 2 years is too little. It can only trap Salus for half an hour at most, sighed Han Jin helplessly. There's no other way. Salus has the strength of an overgod. After half an hour, the yuan energy in Tanai's body will be completely depleted. Many of the formations won't be able to sustain them. As long as there's life, there's hope. We have no choice but to retreat. We can only wait for Father to return before we can take our revenge. Han Tu turned to Gorin and said, "Tell those people that I will open a tunnel 100 meters underground. We will use that opportunity to leave the pandemonium." After listening to Han Jin and Han Tu's explanation, Romont, Rose, and the others no longer said anything. As those who were directly involved in setting up the demonic formations, the 5 elite zombies knew the functions of the demonic formations inside out. Since they said that it was time to retreat, Rose knew that the situation was dire. "All right, I'll give the order right away," replied Gorin in a deep voice. He then hastily left the central hub. "Sigh, it's been months. Why haven't I heard any news from Father?" Han Shui sighed. He thought that if Han Shui were here, he would be able to tap into the Yuan energy in the pandemonium, and the energy of the thousands of demon generals in Cauldron Spirit's body. Even if Salus fell into the formation, he wouldn't be able to escape. Father will come back for sure. Humph, the next time Father comes back, it will be the death of Salus and the others," said Han Hao through gnashed teeth. The 5 elite zombies had spent so much time and energy to set up the pandemonium. Now that the pandemonium was about to be destroyed by Salus, they couldn't bear to let it go. "Let's get ready. We'll be leaving in a while." Han Mu waved his hand. Suddenly, he closed his eyes and sensed for a moment. Then, he shouted, "Leave immediately. There's still a very powerful life force in the dark. That guy is no weaker than Salus." Upon hearing those words, not only Rose, Romont, and the others, but even the 5 elite zombies turned pale. Salus alone was terrifying enough. If another sovereign were to join the fray, they would be in an even more dire situation. Rumors about Salus had been circulating non-stop. It was said that Salus had personally gone to Sovereign Wasis and Sovereign Log and reached an agreement with them. From what Rose and the others could tell, it wasn't entirely impossible. Han Mu closed his eyes and communicated with Asura again. 10 seconds later, Han Mu opened his eyes and said, "Asura has agreed. Let's go." The party was puzzled. They didn't understand why Asura would help them so much at a time like this. But knowing that time was of the essence, they didn't talk about it. They all entered the tunnel that Han Tu had opened and headed deeper into the earth. In a mountain range thousands of miles away from the Empyrean Peak, there was a patch of dried mud. For the past few months, the mud here had been emitting a foul stench. Humans and beasts would fall into the mud if they weren't careful. But now, this patch of mud seemed to have been dried up by fire. In the cold night, a strange creaking sound suddenly came from the ground. After a while, a hand penetrated through the cracked mud and emerged from the ground. "Kacha!" With a loud sound, the entire silt field seemed to have been lifted up by someone, and dust filled the sky. A majestic figure emerged from the dust. His eyes were cold and sinister, but the corners of his mouth were curved into a gentle smile. He had a devilish demeanor. Han Shui raised his head and looked at the night sky. He mumbled to himself, "Although my realm isn't stable and I haven't fully grasped the new energy, it should be enough to deal with Salus." As soon as he finished those words, Han Shui soared into the sky and flew towards the Empyrean Peak at a speed that surpassed the limits of his physical body. He covered the distance of 1,000 miles in an instant. But when he stood on the Empyrean Peak, he discovered that it was empty. There was not a single trace of life. After pondering for a moment, Han Shui's expression changed. He suddenly thought of another possibility. He hastily rushed towards the pandemonium. Chapter 868. Han Shui knew that Salus would search for him at all costs. As the pandemonium was a special place, there was no way it could escape Salus' eyes and ears. It was only a matter of time before Salus found the pandemonium. Han Shui knew very well how powerful Salus and the pandemonium were. He knew that the pandemonium might be able to stop Salus for a while, but there was no way they could kill Salus. If that happened, the lives of the 5 elite zombies, Rose, and the others in the Pandemonium would be in grave danger. Therefore, Han Sho had to rush to the Pandemonium and stop Salus from attacking the Pandemonium. However, Han Sho had somewhat underestimated the intelligence of his 5 sons. He also did not expect that Tanai would have Asura, who was always trying to curry favor with him. While Han Sho was rushing towards the Pandemonium was still in a hellish state. Salus' subordinates were killed one after another inside the demonic formations. Their corpses were strewn all over the place. There was a circular platform at the center of the Pandemonium with the pattern of the cauldron of Myriad Demon. The lifelike cauldron of Myriad Demon glowed with a mystical luster. The souls of those killed by Salus and Tanai transformed into wisps of light smoke that drifted into the cauldron of Myriad Demon. Cauldron Spirit had planned to use the terrifying destructive power of the Pandemonium to collect the souls of those who entered the Pandemonium. Even if Han Sho wasn't in the Pandemonium, he could still use the formation at the center of the platform to collect the souls of those who died. That way, he would be able to collect the souls of those who died when he returned to the Pandemonium. Salus of Tanai was still wearing a grave expression as he dealt with the corrosion of the elements in the Pandemonium. He was constantly depleting the divine energy in his body. As the yuan qi of the various formations in the Pandemonium was continuously gathering around Salus, the power of some of the smaller formations around the Pandemonium began to weaken. The pressure on Salus' subordinates that were still alive was greatly reduced, and they managed to escape. Underground. In the underground tunnel that Earth Elite zombie had dug several hundred meters deep into the ground, Gerald and his subordinates had long since left. Only Han Mu, Han Hua, Rose, Roman, and the others remained underground. "It's about time. Shouldn't we leave too?" asked Romont. Han Mu, Han Hua, and Rose were somewhat reluctant to leave. They had grown attached to the Pandemonium. This was especially true for Han Mu, Han Hua, and the others who had personally helped to set up the Grand Defensive Formation. They considered the Pandemonium to be their home. The thought of their home being destroyed by Salus made their hearts ache. "Maybe Asura will really stop Salus. Don't worry too much, we should be fine," comforted Zovik. That was all he could say at the moment. "That's right. Forget it. Let's go." Even Han too started to get sentimental. "At worst, we'll just spend another 2 years rebuilding the Pandemonium. What's the big deal? Let's go. I hope Asura can help us stay here," said Han Jin as he gestured to Rose, Zovik, and the others to enter the Pandemonium. There was nothing more to say at this point. The party no longer hesitated and entered the underground tunnel. 10 minutes later, Salus heaved a long sigh of relief. He could no longer feel the strange energy invading his body. He felt lucky to have survived a disaster. Salus didn't know that the elemental energies in the Pandemonium could only last for a short period of time. He had just used up a lot of his divine energy. At the rate he was going, it wouldn't take more than 5 days before he ran out of divine energy. When that happened, only death awaited him. For some time, Salus was truly afraid of the mysterious Pandemonium. He grew more and more apprehensive of it. Salus straightened his back and looked around. He noticed that most of the demonic formations in Tanai's Pandemonium had stopped functioning. However, the ground was littered with corpses. They were all his subordinates. He had brought nearly 1,000 of his subordinates with him when he came to the Pandemonium. But now, only about 300 of them were still alive. Of the remaining 300 people, many of them were injured. Most of them were panting heavily, looking exhausted and powerless. Salus had run amok in the fringe for many years, but he had never been in such a sorry state. He had not even seen Han Shu's shadow, yet he had lost more than half of his subordinates. It was not hard to imagine how frustrated he was. A few months ago, the Empyrean Peak had lost many of his subordinates. Today, they had suffered yet another heavy loss. From now on, Salus would have to face the dilemma of having no subordinates at his disposal. To an overlord like him, there was nothing more miserable than this. Search the area. Kill every single one of Tanai's subordinates. Don't leave a single one alive, ordered Salas with a dark face. He regarded Han Shuo as his greatest enemy. He was determined to kill Han Shuo. Those who were lucky enough to survive dragged their weary bodies and wandered around the pandemonium in fear, trying to find an enemy that Salas could vent his anger on. A strange valley had killed more than half of their people in just half a day. Until now, not a single person had been seen. This scene deeply shocked them and made them feel fear from the bottom of their hearts. The 5 elite zombies rose, and the others had long since retreated. No matter how hard they tried, they could not find any trace of them. The anxious Salas subordinates hung their heads dejectedly after searching for half an hour without finding anything. "My lord, there's no one. It's all empty. There's nothing here." "My lord, what do we do? There's no one here." Salas was about to explode from anger. He had gone through so many hardships to get here. He had paid such a heavy price and sacrificed so many of his men, but in the end, he had found nothing. If word of this got out, Salas's reputation would suffer a fatal blow. He would never be able to raise his head in the fringe again. "It's all ruined. If you can't find him, then destroy this place." Now that things had come to this, Salas did not know how to face this sullen matter. By now, Salas's subordinates were looking at him with flickering eyes. They began to feel that the sovereign they had always trusted wasn't as powerful and terrifying as they had imagined. Most importantly, he couldn't provide them with any useful help. He even gave the wrong orders, causing their comrades to die one after another. "Destroy everything," roared Salas fiercely. He seemed to have sensed what his subordinates were thinking. After all, Salas's influence was still there. His subordinates were startled and hastily tried to destroy the pandemonium. "Salas, long time no see." It was at this moment that Asura slowly walked out from the darkness with a warm smile on his face. Salas's face jolted and he coldly said, "Asura, what are you doing here?" "I've been asked to discuss something with you," said Asura smilingly. "The owner of this place spent a great deal of effort to build this place. I hope you can preserve it and not destroy it." Salas stared blankly for a moment before he shouted angrily, "Asura, are you out of your mind? This is Brian's territory. He will only destroy the existing order in the fringe. Why are you defending him? Asura, the 5 sovereigns have ruled the fringe for many years. Do you want to cede your territory to them?" Asura shook his head smilingly and said, "Of course not. But it seems to me that Brian isn't interested in us at all. Haha, you are the only one with bad luck. Not only did you fail to establish your dominance, you even got yourself into trouble." Salas was in a bad mood. He immediately shouted at Asura, "Asura, what do you mean by that? Are you going to defend that outsider?" "Not really. If you can kill Brian first, I don't mind if you destroy this place. But before Brian dies, I have promised someone to look after this place for him." "Haha, I hope you can do me a favor," said Asura. His smile was devoid of anger, but his words were sharp. "Short-sighted," shouted Salas angrily. "Fine, let's see if you can stop me today." Salas was ready to attack as he spoke. Asura chuckled and said, "Salas, oh Salas, it is unwise for you to fight me now. You have exhausted too much of your divine energy in Tanai Pandemonium. Your subordinates won't be able to help you in a real fight. Why don't you reconsider? Cut the crap. I will destroy this place today. No one can stop me," shouted Salas as he glared at Asura. Chapter 869. In the pandemonium, Salas' subordinates were fleeing like rats, trying their best to get as far away from the place as possible. The 2 sovereigns, Asura and Salas, caused an earth-shattering commotion in the surrounding mountains. The 2 were evenly matched in strength. As overgods, the battle was truly intense. It was not something that would end in a short amount of time. The terrifying elemental undulations were sensed by many experts in the vicinity. Some of the fringe dwellers who were clueless about what was going on started flocking towards the pandemonium. They wanted to know what was going on in the pandemonium. The tremors of the earth penetrated deep into the ground. Han too, who was using his innate ability to tear the earth apart and bring Galan and his subordinates away, frowned and immediately understood what was happening. Han too and his subordinates left as soon as the battle between Asura and Salus began. By now, they were in a plain 100 miles away from the pandemonium. "I think we don't have to be in such a hurry to escape," Han too said to Gerald. "Tell your subordinates to stay here. I will go back and take a look. Don't worry, I don't think Salus has the time to deal with us." "What's going on?" asked Gerald, puzzled. Although he was stronger than Han too, he did not have the ability to sense the earth like Han Tuesday. Therefore, he could not understand what the tremors meant. "Salus and Asura are fighting. With Asura's help, Salus won't be able to wreak havoc in the pandemonium Tanai," said Han Tu smilingly before he returned to the pandemonium. After a short while, Han Tu ran into Han Mu, Hanhua, and Rose. He immediately told them what he sensed and believed that Salus and Asura were engaged in an earth-shattering battle. As they were deep underground, Han Mu could not sense Asura's soul undulations and had no idea what was going on in the pandemonium. Upon hearing Han Tu's words, Han Mu and the others were overjoyed. They asked simultaneously, "Really?" Han Tu nodded affirmatively and smilingly said, "I can sense that only an expert of Asura's level can cause such a powerful earthquake. It seems that Asura is really helping us. Then why are we in such a hurry to leave? Let's go back and see what's going on. Who knows when Father will arrive?" Hanhua laughed heartily before he turned around and flew towards the pandemonium. The commotion caused by the pandemonium was so great that all the experts in the surrounding regions who had reached a certain level of strength could more or less sense it. Other than those who could sense it, only a few experts who were further away from the fringe could sense it. The peerless experts who sensed the battle between the overgods and the pandemonium through the elemental energies immediately put down everything they were doing and rushed to the pandemonium. At the mouth of a volcano, the calm little skull Han Hao was lying in ambush, preparing to attack a force. Ever since he subdued Polo, the power Han Hao wielded had increased tremendously. Unknowingly, the power little skull Han Hao wielded had far exceeded that of an average force. Although the fringe was vast, there were only a handful of people who were more powerful than Han Hao. "What do we do?" Polo, who was crouching beside Han Hao, asked in a low voice. In front of them were experts under Sovereign Log's command. Their leader was a late-stage high god expert who cultivated in the energy of light. This group of experts seemed to have gotten used to not being provoked by anyone in the fringe. They wore relaxed expressions and did not put on much of a vigilance. Log was infamous for his viciousness and treachery in the land of chaos. He was even more troublesome than the violent Salus. Generally speaking, his subordinates could do as they pleased in the land of chaos. No one would dare to lay their hands on them. Polo had been a god hunter in the fringe for many years, but he had never once thought of attacking Log's subordinates. But now, Han Hao had just taken over Log's subordinates, and he was about to make a big move. "Kill!" shouted Han Hao without hesitation. Polo made up his mind, raised his head, and waved his hand. The god hunters who received the order flew down from the mouth of the volcano and surrounded Log's subordinates. Without uttering a word, they started killing them. "Let's join hands and get rid of that man. Once he's dead, things will be much easier," said Han Hao as he pointed at the arrogant high god of light. "Understood." Polo nodded. Polo was now following Han Hao's lead. He knew that it was better to cut the crap. Polo and Han Hao finally charged out. They paid no heed to that high god of light's threat, and did not give him any chance to speak. They attacked with all their might and killed the high god of light in half an hour. His subordinates were also surrounded and devoured by the god hunters. While the god hunters were happily killing and plundering, Han Hao raised his head and looked at the sky. Suddenly, he sensed that something was amiss. He bunched his brows and muttered to himself for a moment. His eyes glowed with evil radiance, and he coldly shouted, "I will give you 10 minutes. After 10 minutes, all of you will come with me. 10 minutes isn't enough for my subordinates to devour all of their energy." Polo stared blankly. "I'll give you 10 minutes!" Han Hao shouted. He seemed rather impatient. Polo had known Han Hao for a long time, but he had never seen Han Hao so impatient. He knew that something must have happened. Without saying another word, he ordered his subordinates to hurry up. 10 minutes later, Han Hao flew towards the pandemonium without saying a word. Polo and his subordinates followed closely behind him. The battle between Pandemonium and Tanai was still going on. The battle between Asura and Salus had affected too many factors. Even they did not know how many sovereigns would be rushing towards the Pandemonium. They were all fighting with all their might, hoping to suppress their opponent. At this point, Asura's goal was no longer just to protect the Pandemonium for Han Shuo. Although the 5 sovereigns of the Fringe possessed almost equal strength, some would speculate about who was stronger. In many people's minds, Tyre was the strongest of the 5 sovereigns. The other 4 sovereigns were almost equal in strength. It was precisely because of this understanding that the super experts from the 12 dominions who came to the Fringes would usually choose to submit to Tyre first. This caused Tyre's power to grow stronger and stronger. Whether it was Asura, Log, Salus, or Wasis, they were all secretly fighting for fame. If Asura could prove that he could defeat Salus, it would mean that he was stronger than Salus, Log, and Wasis. Asura's strength would then be considered to be on par with Tyre. This kind of reputation would bring him many benefits. In the future, many experts from the 12 dominions would choose to be his subordinates. Now was the perfect opportunity. Salus had used up a lot of soul energy in his battle with Han Shuo a few months ago. He had also used up a lot of divine energy in the Pandemonium. This was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to defeat Salus. How could Asura not grab hold of such an opportunity? Salus was hot-tempered and impulsive. From his point of view, Asura's action was no different from adding fuel to the fire. If it were a sovereign like Log, he wouldn't choose to fight Asura today because it would be disadvantageous to him. But Salus didn't care about that. In his opinion, anyone who offended him must be avenged immediately. He would not allow anyone to get away scot-free. The battle between Asura and Han Shuo was like a bolt from the blue. How could it be calmed down? As the battle between Asura and Han Shuo caused an earth-shattering commotion, many forces in the vicinity of the Pandemonium hurried over. They didn't dare to approach the area where the 2 overgods were fighting. They only observed the battle from afar and observed the changes in the elements, and the interweaving of lightning. Battles between overgods rarely happened. It was very difficult for outsiders to witness them. For those high gods who wished to advance further, this was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. That was because they might be able to comprehend some of the true essence and usage of power through a battle between overgods. This would help them understand the mysteries of the overgod realm. There wasn't a late-stage high god who didn't want to break through the most difficult hurdle on the path of cultivation. Breaking through to the overgod realm meant that one would have the right to speak to anyone. It meant that one would have more power, more influence, and more subordinates. It was an irresistible temptation. Gods from all over the Fringe had gathered at the Pandemonium to witness the earth-shattering battle between the 2 overgods with all kinds of motives. Some of the more daring wind elementals learned about the Pandemonium and Tanai's corpses. Those wind elementals quickly spread the news. The gods who came to the Pandemonium soon learned of the situation and started gossiping among themselves. The Pandemonium was littered with corpses, but they were all Salus's subordinates. Not a single corpse belonged to the Pandemonium. What did this mean? Those who came with ulterior motives were suddenly filled with curiosity about the Pandemonium. They reminded themselves not to provoke the people of the Pandemonium before the situation was clear. Another day passed. The battle grew more and more intense. The sky was filled with lightning bolts and thunder. The earth undulated like an ocean, while all kinds of energies soared into the sky. On this day, a big fat man with a benevolent smile appeared in the pandemonium. His beady eyes sparkled with amazement as he observed the battle between Asura and Salus from afar. "It's Monarch Log! He's here!" A high god of death sensed the change in the energy of death around him. He couldn't help but exclaim in shock when he raised his head to look. The crowd raised their heads and saw the big fat man. Their faces jolted and they quietly left the area as though they were trying to avoid the plague. Chapter 870. Rog's arrival caused many people to be alarmed. One by one, they distanced themselves from him, afraid that their careless actions would anger Rog, who changed his attitude faster than flipping a page. As an over-god, as soon as Log arrived, the two over-gods who were fighting immediately sensed his presence. Salus and Asura were startled. They moved cautiously, fearing that they would be ambushed by the cunning Log. Wazer arrived within half a day after Log. His arrival caused a chilly wind to blow across the pandemonium and the surrounding temperature to plummet. The appearance of the two sovereigns, Log and Wasis, caused the smaller forces in the vicinity to move far away, fearing that they would be caught in the crossfire. They hid in the valleys and the crevices of the cliffs to observe the situation. They carefully sensed the intense elemental undulations coming from afar. "Haha, I didn't expect that Salus and Asura would fight over an insignificant character. It seems that the fringe has been peaceful for too long. Everyone is looking for something to do," said Log smilingly as he looked at the battle between Salus and Asura. Varus wore a cold face. His piercing eyes stared at Log and said indifferently, "Asura doesn't see the bigger picture. He actually helped a troublemaker who popped out of nowhere." Log looked at Wasis smilingly and said, "In my opinion, helping that youngster is just an excuse. Asura's real motive is to use Salus to establish his dominance." Wasis let out a cold groan and said disdainfully, "Asura has a good plan. But if he really defeats Salus, won't you seize the opportunity to fight him?" Log was stunned. He shook his head and replied, "I don't have the time to do that. If you are interested, you can come at me. If you don't have the time, why did you come all the way here?" Wasis smirked and said, "I am going to make a move and you are going to watch from the sidelines. You are going to attack me when I am injured from my battle with Asura? Hee, Log, that's a good plan." "Ah, Wazer, oh Wazer, you are too paranoid." Log shook his head and sighed. He looked as if he had been wronged. Wazer snorted and did not say anything else. The 5 sovereigns of the fringe were familiar with each other. They had a general understanding of each other's strength and style of doing things. Log was one of those treacherous and vicious people who put on a friendly face but would strike at the most opportune moment without hesitation. If Log did not come today, Wasis might have attacked the winner between Salus and Asura. But now that Log was here, Wasis dared not act rashly. He was afraid that he would become Log's target. While Log and Wasis were conversing, the battle between Salus and Asura was still going on. Originally, Salus and Asura were equally matched in strength. However, Salus had exhausted the energy of his believers from several material planes in his battle against Han Shuo. Then, he had consumed too much divine energy in the battle against Pandemonium Tanai. Therefore, as the battle went on, Salus began to show signs of fatigue. Asura, on the other hand, had taken the defensive stance right from the start. He used the energy of the earth element to withstand Salus' lightning strikes. As the battle dragged on, Salus began to show signs of exhaustion. Asura finally began to go on the offensive. One side was unstoppable while the other was exhausted. Salus finally realized that he was in a disadvantageous position. As Asura's attacks grew fiercer and fiercer, Salus found it hard to keep up. Gradually, he fell into a disadvantageous position. The battle between the two overgods was so intense that most of the spectators couldn't see it clearly. But from the density of the elements in the air, they could roughly tell which side had the upper hand. When the battle began, the energy of thunder and lightning filled the entire space. Asora's earth element seemed to be weakening. But as time went by, the spectators noticed that the energy of thunder and lightning above their heads had gradually weakened. On the contrary, the energy of earth element had become denser and denser. The spectators knew that Salus had fallen into a disadvantageous position. They did not know what happened before the battle between Salus and Asura, but judging from the current situation, Asura seemed to be slightly stronger than Salus. That was more than enough. In the future, when the 12 dominions came to the fringe, if they had to choose between Salus and Asura, they would undoubtedly choose the stronger one. Logue and Wazer looked on coldly from the sidelines. Salus and Asura were still engaged in battle. 4 of the 5 sovereigns of the fringe had arrived. Only Tyre, who was rumored to be the strongest, had yet to arrive. The battle dragged on until late at night. Salus was starting to show signs of fatigue. It was getting harder and harder for him to withstand Asura's attacks. However, Salus was one of the 5 sovereigns of the fringe, and one of the most hot-blooded of them all. Salus's eyes were bloodshot. It seemed that he would drag Asura to hell even if he had to die in the battle. Although Asura had gained the upper hand, he didn't feel proud at all. He knew that Salus was the kind of person who would fight to the death with anyone who provoked him. If Logue and Wasis weren't here, Asura might really fight Salus until one of them died. However, Asura knew that neither Logue nor Wasis were honorable characters. Once he and Salus fought to the end, it would be a battle to the death. At that time, even if he won, he would have to face the attacks of both Logue and Wasis. He would be in his weakest state. It would be hard to say if he could escape from Logue and Wasis. Even if he were lucky enough to escape, Logue and Wasis would attack the underground palace without hesitation after learning that he was injured. They would do everything in their power to destroy Asura's forces. That was not what Asura wanted. Therefore, even though Asura had gained the upper hand, he started to hesitate. He was even more worried than Salus. "Salus, I don't think there's a need for us to fight anymore." Asura suddenly retreated. He looked at the panting Salus from afar and said with a bitter smile, "Logue and Wasis have arrived. If we fight to the end, none of us will come out unscathed. Asura, how dare you hit me when I'm down? I will not let you off!" roared Salus. Asura was stunned for a moment. He thought that Salus would risk his life to fight him. "But let's call it a day. When I recover my divine energy, I will find you in the underground palace," shouted Salus to Asura after he shot a cold glance at Logue and Wasis who were watching the fight from afar. Although Salus was hot-tempered and impulsive, he knew that the situation was extremely unfavorable for him, especially when Logue and Wasis were still in peak condition. If he continued to fight Asura, he would be the one to suffer in the end, followed by Asura. "Hey, why aren't you two fighting?" Logue made a fuss and shouted. "The fight isn't over. Salus, this isn't like you at all. Logue, what did you promise me?" Salus was enraged. He glared at Logue and said, "Didn't we reach an agreement? Didn't you say that you would help me?" Logue chuckled and nodded. "That's right, I did say that I would help you. But what I promised was to help you deal with that outsider named Brian, not Asura. Haha, I've been friends with Asura for many years. My relationship with him is no less than yours. How could I do something so unbefitting of a friend?" Asura put on a fake smile as he listened to Logue's nonsense. After Logue finished, Asura smilingly said, "Yeah, I think it's about time for it to end." By now, Salus had lost all his dignity, and was no longer in the mood to stay and destroy the pandemonium. All he wanted to do was to leave this place as soon as possible. "Asura, just you wait. I will definitely find you in the underground palace." Salus shot a cold glance at Asura before he waved his hand and shouted, "All of you, return to the Empyrean Peak!" The subordinates of Salus hung their heads dejectedly. They felt that the recent period of time had been nothing short of torture. They were thinking about how they should face others in the fringe in the future. So many of their men had died. Not to mention that Salas was clearly not as powerful as he used to be in the battle against Asura. It was obvious that Salas was not as powerful as he used to be. As subordinates of Salas, their benefits were directly affected. Now, they began to worry about whether they could still be respected in the Amphilas like before. I didn't say to leave. No one is allowed to leave. Suddenly, a shrill voice sounded from afar. A majestic figure suddenly appeared in the sky above the pandemonium. It's you! You have finally appeared. Salas, who was about to leave, was enraged. He glared at Han Shuo with hatred in his eyes and looked as though he was about to pounce at Han Shuo. None of you are allowed to leave either, shouted Han Shuo coldly. 17 icy radiances whizzed out from his swords. Those who had gathered from all directions to see what was happening in the pandemonium were sliced in half by the 17 flying swords. Among the dead were 3 high gods. Those onlookers who were planning to ignore Han Shuo and get as far away from the scene as possible. When they saw that Han Shuo had the audacity to disregard the 5 sovereigns as soon as he arrived and slaughter a dozen or so experts in a single move, they were horrified. None of them dared to make another move. Standing proudly in the air above the pandemonium, Han Shuo's eyes were glistening with icy radiances. He looked around and took in every single person and scenery around him. He heaved a sigh of relief when he saw that the pandemonium was not destroyed. Han Shuo expanded his consciousness and gradually discovered the 5 elite zombies hiding underground. Han Shuo felt a little more at ease. Log Wasis, you said that you would help me get rid of this outsider, roared Salas. Log and Wasis were astonished. They looked at the young expert who had recently shown off his abilities in the fringe and sensed the evil and frenzied energy emanating from him. They looked hesitant. Chapter 871. As soon as Han Shuo appeared, he started killing people in front of everyone. He did not show any mercy. Not only that, those he killed were not Salas's subordinates, but the bystanders who were trying to escape from this dangerous place. The 17 flying swords whizzed through the air and took away more than a dozen lives. It all happened in the blink of an eye. Before anyone could react, the dozen or so people had turned into puddles of blood. This was the first time that Log and Wasis had seen Han Shuo in person. When they discovered that Han Shuo possessed unfathomable strength, their faces turned gloomy. Instead of joining forces with Salas to deal with Han Shuo, they remained unusually silent. Hey Brian, it's been a long time. I've been fighting with Salas for the sake of protecting the pandemonium for you, said Asura with a smile on his face. To him, the stronger Han Shuo was, the better. That way, Salas and the others would have more headaches. Han Shuo, who had been wearing a cold face all this while, finally ascertained that the pandemonium had not suffered too much damage. His consciousness had also sensed the life auras of the 5 elite zombies. Han Shuo finally put on a smile and said to Asura, "Thank you very much. I will remember this favor." You're welcome, you're welcome." Asura waved his hand repeatedly. Deep down, he was very happy. He thought that with his help today, no matter what kind of trouble Han Shuo was causing in the fringe, he would be able to reap the benefits. After Han Shuo's killing spree, no one dared to move recklessly. They were all looking at the troublemaker who had caused a huge commotion in the fringe. Log and Wasis couldn't gauge Han Shuo's true strength. They couldn't decide if they should help Salas in the battle against Han Shuo. Log, Wasis, what is the meaning of this? Seeing that Log and Wazer were not saying anything, Sakas cursed. Mother asterisk cur. I don't need you two to deal with him. All I need you two to do is to block his path and make sure he doesn't slip away. Can't you two be a little more decisive? From Salas's point of view, as long as Roger and Wasis could stop Han Shuo from escaping again, he was confident that he could kill Han Shuo in front of everyone. Now that Han Shuo was dead, Asura would no longer have a reason to go against him. As long as he was given some time to recover his strength, he would be able to prove that he was still one of the sovereigns in the fringe. He would be able to summon the ferocious gods from the 12 dominions and wreak havoc in the fringe. Sokka's, cut the crap, you bastard! I won't be leaving today. Let's see if you can hold out until the end. Han Sho suddenly threw his head back and laughed loudly. As soon as his laughter sounded, he turned into a rainbow and shot towards Salus. In an instant, Han Sho seemed to have transformed into a demon god from hell. A terrifying, evil energy crazily spread in all directions with him as the center. This evil energy was filled with ruthlessness, bloodlust, cruelty, and coldness. It was as though it wanted to annihilate the entire heaven and earth. The faces of Log, Wasis, and Asura changed at the same time. They looked at Han Sho in astonishment, as though they couldn't believe that this was the same Han Sho who had stirred up a storm in the fringe recently. All the gods in the vicinity were affected by this sinister energy. Some of the weaker mid-gods felt their hearts tremble, and they almost prostrated themselves before Han Sho. They couldn't even muster up the urge to oppose Han Sho. It was a feeling of invincibility. It was as though Han Sho was the overlord of the world at this very moment, and could easily vaporize any life form that dared to defy his orders. At this very moment, the leaders of the various forces who had come to spectate all had the same thought: perhaps Sokka's will be defeated. Log and Wasis were astonished. They looked at Salus in bewilderment. They couldn't understand how Salus managed to force Han Sho to flee back at the Empyrean Peak. Judging from the terrifying aura that Han Sho had just displayed, it was highly unlikely that Salus would emerge victorious even if he and Salus fought. What the hell is going on? Log and Wasis shouted in their minds, but they couldn't get an answer. The one who was the happiest of them all was Asura. He suddenly realized that he had made the right bet this time. Although he didn't know why Han Sho had suddenly become so terrifying, he knew that he and Han Sho were friends, not enemies. In the future, as long as he and Han Sho could work together in the fringe, they would not have to fear even the most powerful sovereign, Tyre. Of course, Salus found it the hardest to accept. When he sensed the terrifying evil energy emanating from Han Sho, he realized that the current Han Sho was completely different from the one he knew back at the Empyrean Peak. Back at the Empyrean Peak, although Salus didn't know anything about Han Sho, he didn't sense any terrifying energy from Han Sho that could threaten him. But this time, Salus knew that he might very well die. "Salus, who do you think will die here today?" asked Han Sho as he laughed maniacally at the sky. He felt extremely carefree as he sensed the destructive energy in his body. He had just entered the Skybreak realm, and there were still many demonic arts and profound mysteries that he had yet to comprehend. Yet, with just his current strength, he was able to suppress Salus in terms of aura, striking fear into the hearts of everyone present. Facing Han Sho's provocation, Salus's face was filled with uncertainty. He was no longer as reckless as before. He had become much more cautious. "He's bluffing! He must be bluffing! If he really has such a powerful force, he wouldn't have run away from the Empyrean Peak. This can't be real!" said Salus as he glared at Han Sho hatefully. However, he didn't dare to attack Han Sho. He kept telling himself in his mind to encourage himself. Salus, are you afraid?" said Han Sho as he laughed maniacally. "It doesn't matter. Since you don't dare to attack, I'll help you." As soon as he finished speaking, the 17 flying swords shot towards Salus. Each flying sword was like a spirit snake as they followed a dazzling and beautiful curve, surrounding Salus from 17 directions. The 17 flying swords transformed into 17 rays of light as they shot towards Salus. The rays of light strangely overlapped and gathered all the power into one. The Avicii god's slaying sword formation's deity slaying slash was easily released. A huge ray of light carrying a world-destroying murderous aura firmly locked onto Salus and destroyed all the barriers that Salus had hastily formed. The power of thunder and lightning was scattered by the ray of light, and couldn't be gathered together. Salus felt that his soul was firmly locked onto. No matter where he hid, it seemed that he couldn't escape from the huge ray of light. He knew that he couldn't retreat. If he did, it would only strengthen the momentum of the ray of light. In the end, he would suffer a crushing defeat and even be killed. After gathering all the power, the souls of the believers in Salus's hands once again offered up all the power in the remaining realms. One by one, the believers who worshipped Salus as the only god bled from their 7 orifices and died one after another. At this moment, those realms were plunged into an abyss of misery and suffering. They became planets of death without a trace of life. The power of the souls of those believers crossed the realms and all gathered on Salus's body, forming the most powerful power of thunder and lightning above his head. At the most critical moment, it blocked the bombardment of Han Shaw's world-destroying ray of light. As if the end of the world, an incomparably loud rumble resounded. Amidst the dazzling ray of light, the earth was torn apart. 2 hills were razed to the ground. Rubble flew into the air and turned into dust. Apart from Log, Wasis, and Asura, who possessed the strength of an overlord, no one knew what happened between Han Shu and Salus. Amidst the dazzling light and deafening sound, they lost all sight and hearing. They could only sense their surroundings through their souls. After a long time, the dazzling light dissipated and the flying sand and stones gradually calmed down. Salus panted heavily. He glared at Han Shu, who had an indifferent expression, and said, "That's it for today. I won't let you go. If it wasn't for the fact that I had fought with Asura earlier, I would have killed you." Before Han Shu could say anything, Salus transformed into a rainbow and disappeared without a trace, leaving behind even his followers. Han Shu did not pursue him because he knew that it would be very difficult to pursue an overgod expert, especially when Log and Wasis were present. Furthermore, the 5 elite zombies rose and the others had just emerged from the pandemonium. He did not know what would happen to Pandemonium if he left now. After the spectators adjusted to their surroundings, they still did not understand what had happened. But after seeing Salus's sudden departure, they came to the conclusion that Salus was afraid of Han Shu. I'm just here to watch the show. I have no intention of making an enemy out of you." Log stared blankly for a moment before he forced a smile, and said those words to Han Shu. Then, ignoring Han Shu, he hastily left the place. Wasis did not say anything. He nodded at Han Shu and left after Log, disappearing in the blink of an eye. "You may all leave now. I don't want to see strangers in my valley," said Han Shu smilingly. He waved his hand at the people nearby, hinting them to leave. Can we leave too?" one of Sokka's subordinates asked in disbelief, his face full of anticipation. "Leave? I don't think you have much of a future with Salus. A sovereign who abandons his followers and leaves on his own is not worth following. All right, leave. I don't have any enmity with you," said Han Shu generously as he waved his hand. He was going to use these people's mouths to spread the news of what happened today throughout the fringe. Those followers of Salus felt as though they had just been pardoned. They thanked Han Shu gratefully and hastily left the pandemonium. On a bald mountain not far from the pandemonium, a man muttered to himself, "Interesting. The fringe has been peaceful for too long. It's time for some fun." As soon as he finished those words, he disappeared in a burst of destructive energy. Chapter 872. Those who had gathered in the pandemonium from all directions vanished in an instant. They had witnessed the battle between Salus and Asura. They had even witnessed Han Shu's terrifying evil energy forcing Salus to retreat. Soon, there was no one else in the vicinity except for Asura. Han Shu put on a faint smile and thanked Asura again. "Thank you very much. Without your help, the pandemonium wouldn't have survived until now." "You're welcome. Haha, we are friends. It's only right for us to help each other," replied Asura with a smile. He did not dare to be careless. Although Asura was very curious about Han Shu the last time he met Han Shu, He did not have a deep impression of him, and his attitude towards Han Sho was not as friendly as it was now. The fringe was a place where the strong were revered. The last time Asura met Han Sho, he did not regard Han Sho as an existence of the same level. It was inevitable that he would behave with the arrogance of a sovereign. But today was different. Judging from the strength Han Sho displayed in the battle against Salus, Han Sho clearly possessed the strength to fight any sovereign in the fringe. Therefore, when Asura met Han Sho again, he had already regarded Han Sho as a hero of the fringe. There was not the slightest trace of arrogance on his face. "In short, I will remember this favor," said Han Sho smilingly. Then, he shifted his gaze to the center of the fringe. At the same time, the cauldron of myriad demon whizzed out of Han Sho's body. It transformed into a gray shadow and floated to the center of the platform with the image of the cauldron of myriad demon. Thousands upon thousands of wisps of gray smoke drifted into the cauldron of myriad demon that was hovering in midair. The souls of those who died in the fringe were pulled into the center of the formation and collected, awaiting the arrival of the cauldron of myriad demon. Asura immediately sensed the flow of bizarre energy. He looked at the little cauldron of myriad demon in amazement, and wondered what kind of miraculous functions and energy this divine weapon possessed. In Asura's eyes, every part of Han Sho was shrouded in mystery. He had yet to figure out what kind of energy Han Sho cultivated and how he was able to force Salus to flee. To Asura, Han Sho was unfathomable. He wanted to know as much about Han Sho as he did in Han Sho. Strands of his divine soul flowed into the cauldron of myriad demon. With a calm face, he spoke to Asura in a relaxed manner. "Do you think Salus will be able to establish itself in the fringe?" Asura stared blankly for a moment before he chuckled and said, "Unless Salus can prove that he is stronger than you and me, his reputation in the fringe will take a nosedive. Most importantly, he left his followers and left on his own. I don't think there will be many who will be willing to serve a master like him in the future." Han Sho laughed heartily and said, "It won't be that easy for Salus to recover his strength. I'm starting to wonder if he dares to come to me again." Even if Salus did not fight Asura, Han Sho was confident that he could defeat Asura. Han Sho believed that Salus himself was well aware of this. Therefore, Han Sho did not believe that Salus would be so reckless as to throw his life away. It will be difficult for Salus to survive in the fringe. Brian, the Omphalos has always been managed by the 5 sovereigns. Now that Salus has lost his power, are you interested in taking over?" asked Asura smilingly. As the center of the fringe, the Omphalos was a very special place. Due to the existence of the 5 sovereigns, the Omphalos had always maintained a transcendent status. No one would dare to cause trouble in the Omphalos. The Omphalos was also a trading hub for the sovereigns. It was obvious that Asura intended for Han Sho to replace Salus and take over a portion of the Omphalos. Of course, Han Sho would never let go of such a precious land. He put on a mischievous smile and said, "I will be visiting the Omphalos soon. I would like to see who dares to collect my taxes. Well then, I'll be taking my leave." Asura couldn't help but feel a little more concerned after hearing those words. Since he had achieved his goal, he still had to deal with some matters regarding Salus. "Yes, thank you, Asura. I will remember your kindness," promised Han Sho before he smilingly watched Asura leave. After Asura's figure disappeared, Han Sho put on an enigmatic smile and mumbled to himself, "Asura, oh Asura, you are truly considerate this time." A few minutes after Asura left, the 5 elite zombies, Rose, Romont, Zovik, and the others walked out of the underground palace. They were overjoyed to see that the pandemonium did not suffer too much damage. "Father, you are finally here!" Han Jin heaved a sigh of relief and said, "If you had come any later, the pandemonium might have been destroyed by those bastards. We have spent too much manpower and resources to build up the pandemonium. I don't want to see our homeland being razed to the ground. Where's Salus, father? What happened to Salus?" Han Hu asked as soon as he emerged from the underground palace. He was more concerned about Salus, who forced them to flee the pandemonium. He ran away. I believe that even if he had fully recovered his strength, he would have to reconsider whether or not he can fight us," said Hanshaw calmly. He looked at the crowd smilingly and guaranteed, "From today onwards, you will not have to fear anyone in the fringe." The 5 elite zombies rose, and the others could sense the difference in Hanshaw even if Hanshaw didn't say it. They could only sense that the current Hanshaw was as oppressive as a mountain and as unfathomable as the ocean. They dared not think of making an enemy out of him. The 5 elite zombies rose, and the others did not know what had happened to Hanshaw, but they knew that Hanshaw must have made some kind of breakthrough and become even more terrifying than before. Hanshaw wasn't a person who would speak without thinking. The fact that he dared to say that they did not have to fear anyone in the fringe was enough to prove that he was no longer afraid of the 5 sovereigns. "Father, are you saying that you now have enough strength to deal with the 5 sovereigns?" Han Mu was overjoyed. He knew what this meant, and he could hardly contain his excitement. Hanshaw nodded smilingly and replied, "That's right. That's great." Hanhua laughed maniacally and shouted, "In that case, we can do whatever we want in the Amphilas. We don't have to worry about taxes anymore. Those sovereigns sure are greedy. They have to pay 100 black crystal coins to stay in the Amphilas for a day. How many black crystal coins can the Amphilas earn in a day?" "All right, let's not talk about this anymore," Hanshaw asked. "Where are Gorin and his followers?" "Don't worry, father. Gorin and the others are fine. They are staying underground." "Well, because Salus is here, I was worried that Salus will destroy the pandemonium and everything he and his followers have. That's why I brought them underground. I believe that they will come out of the pandemonium soon," Han Tu explained. "That's great." Hanshaw looked around and said, "The pandemonium has more or less sustained some damage. All right, the 5 of you will work with me. We will restore the pandemonium to its original state." After a short pause, Hanshaw grinned and said, "Perhaps I can add some more power to Tanai Pandemonium. Even if one of the 5 sovereigns comes to destroy the pandemonium one day, they will have to shed a layer of skin first." Back when the pandemonium was being constructed, Hanshaw had yet to enter the Skybreak realm. Therefore, his physical strength and understanding of demonic formations were not as strong as they were now. Now that he had reached the new realm, he had gained even greater power and a deeper understanding of demonic formations. Therefore, the pandemonium was no longer the same as before. "That's great!" the 5 elite zombies exclaimed. They knew that Hanshaw was confident in his ability to make such a bold claim. Hanshaw and his father then spent all their energy on the pandemonium. They patiently made the pandemonium more and more terrifying. "What?" Han Hao, the little skull, was standing next to a cold lake in a valley. He was looking at a windspurt who had come from the pandemonium. "Salus has been defeated. That outsider Brian has defeated Salus. Everyone has left the pandemonium." The unlucky windspurt had a terrified look on his face as he looked at the group of ferocious fiends rushing towards the pandemonium. When Han Hao sensed the anomaly in the pandemonium, he put down everything he was doing and rushed to the pandemonium. He had only made it a third of the way to the pandemonium when he ran into this windspurt who was spreading news about the pandemonium. "I won't kill you if you tell me everything." Han Hao was overjoyed to hear that Hanshaw had defeated Salus. He knew that his father had finally made a breakthrough, and he was more excited than ever. Salus came to the pandemonium looking for trouble. First, he suffered great losses. Then, he encountered Asura. After fighting for a few days the windspurt knew what kind of people he was facing. He hastily recounted everything he knew. Han Hao patiently listened until the windspurt finished. He nodded and instructed his subordinates. "Let him go. Chief, this fella cultivates in the energy of darkness. Can I?" One of the god hunters looked at the windspurt greedily and begged Han Hao. "Spare me, my lord, please spare me. I have told you everything, you promised to let me go." The wind spirit knelt in front of Han Hao in fear and cried with snot and tears running down his face. Han Hao waved his hand and said, "You may leave." Han Hao glanced at his subordinate who cultivated in the energy of darkness and said, "You must abide by the rules." "Understood." The subordinate replied solemnly but did not say anything else. "Let's turn around. We'll go to Sokka's place to take a look," commanded Han Hao. Instead of heading towards the pandemonium, he planned to wipe out the remaining forces of Salus and plunder all the wealth that Salus had accumulated in the fringe. Chapter 873. A year passed by in the blink of an eye. During this time, Han Sha had been staying in Tanai Pandemonium. He had been working with the 5 elite zombies to set up the Pandemonium and meditating on the differences in his new realm. After entering the Skybreak realm, Han Sha could clearly feel the changes in his body. Every strand of demonic yuan in his body was much stronger than before. It gave Han Sha an indescribable sense of satisfaction. In this new realm, Han Sha's invincible almond body was finally nearing completion. No matter how sudden the attack was, the invincible almond body would be able to protect his body in a timely manner. When there was no danger, his demonic body would remain relaxed and wouldn't waste any magical yuan. What delighted Han Sha the most was that not only could the invincible almond body proactively defend against attacks, it could also generate the power to counterattack. No matter who it was, as long as they wanted to harm him, they would face the power of the invincible almond body's counterattack. Han Sha experimented on Romont, who had a relatively stronger body. Han Sha sat cross-legged with his eyes closed, meditating and not thinking about anything else. He calmed his mind and gave Romont the opportunity to attack. Romont approached and suddenly attacked Han Sha. When his ferocious attack landed on Han Sha's body, an overwhelming force erupted from Han Sha's body. Romont was sent flying by the rebounding force. His eardrums were ringing and he saw stars. As Han Sha couldn't estimate the force of the counterattack, he didn't dare to go too deep and let Romont attack with all his might. But judging from the fact that Romont didn't dare to attack again after using the invincible almond body, Han Sha reckoned that the force of the counterattack was not small. From this point of view, after reaching the Skybreak realm, not only did Han Sha's state of mind and strength improve tremendously, he had also reached the mastery level of the invincible almond body. In the future, even if Han Sha didn't have to be vigilant, he wouldn't have to worry about any sneak attacks. Anyone who dared to harm him, as long as they were weak, would fall into a trap of their own making and might even lose their lives in vain. During the year, Han Sha spent his time laying out the Pandemonium. The 5 elite zombies added many deadly demonic formations to the Pandemonium. Perhaps it was due to Han Sha's influence, or perhaps the 5 elite zombies had gained some enlightenment while laying out demonic formations, but all of them made breakthroughs and were on the verge of becoming high gods. The 5 elite zombies were different from others. Due to the unique energy within their bodies and the fact that they could form the pentaelemental undead formation, the pentaelemental undead formation would become even more terrifying as long as their strength increased. Every time the 5 made a breakthrough, it meant that the power of the pentaelemental undead formation would increase severalfold. After a year, the 5 elite zombies stayed in the Pandemonium and focused on stabilizing their realm. They had made the breakthrough from mid-stage mid-god to late-stage mid-god, hoping to advance even further and possess even greater power. In Tanai, the elemental energy between heaven and earth was denser than anywhere else. Rose and the others had benefited tremendously. Many of the gods cultivating in the Pandemonium had gained new insights into the mysteries of energy, and made breakthroughs in their realms. The concentration of elemental energy in the Pandemonium was dozens of times higher than anywhere else. Not only did the elemental energy in the Pandemonium increase the rate of elemental energy gathering, but they could also sense the changes in themselves. Even Rose seemed to be on the verge of a breakthrough. She stayed in the gymnasium for months at a time. Other than the 5 elite zombies, Rose had spent the longest time with Han Shuo. She had experienced many battles and battles. Every time she faced death, Rose would have a clearer understanding of herself. After such a long time, she finally felt the calling of a new realm. She was preparing to enter the late-stage High God realm. During that year, news about Han Shuo had been circulating in every region of the Fringe. Anyone who talked about Han Shuo would speak with reverence. They regarded Han Shuo as an existence on par with the 5 sovereigns. Some youngsters even idolized Han Shuo. Many of those with decent strength even went to the Pandemonium to follow Han Shuo. Han Shuo left the management of the Fringe to Zovik and Gorin. If there were extraordinary talents and clean identities, Han Shuo would let them stay. After all, Han Shuo had planned to make a big splash in the Fringe, and he needed more manpower to handle all kinds of emergencies. Other than Han Shuo, there was another person who had made a name for himself in the Fringe this year, Little Skull Han Hao. Salus had been missing ever since he left the Pandemonium. No one knew where he had gone. It was as though he had vanished into thin air. No one had seen him in the Fringe for a year. Even his most loyal subordinates had not received any news about Salus. There were many rumors about Salus' disappearance. Some said that he was hiding in an unknown region to recover his energy. Others said that he was afraid of Han Shuo and had left the Fringe. There were many rumors about Salus, but none of them could be verified. Salus had disappeared without a trace. His subordinates were disheartened and could no longer act as they pleased in the Fringe. Salus's subordinates had suffered greatly in the past year. Some powerful enemies who had misgivings about Salus had taken advantage of Salus after Salus had fallen from power to force them into hiding. As for Han Shuo, he was the most frightening person to be chased by. He wasn't motivated by hatred but by the wealth Salus had left behind. Leading a group of god hunters, Han Hao wreaked havoc in the Fringe. Many of Salus's subordinates were killed by Han Hao's men. Most of the wealth Salus had left behind fell into Han Hao's hands. Other than Han Hao, the other 4 sovereigns were also drooling over the wealth Salus had left behind. They had also dispatched their subordinates to target Han Hao's wealth. However, it seemed that the subordinates of the other 4 sovereigns weren't as capable as Han Hao. Their gains couldn't be compared to Han Hao's. The subordinates of the sovereigns were all domineering and ruthless people in the Fringe. However, it seemed that they had received some sort of order. None of them attacked Han Hao, who had suddenly risen to power. They allowed Han Hao to compete with them for Salus's wealth but did not kill Han Hao. They maintained a tacit understanding of not interfering with each other's business. None of the other 4 sovereigns in the Fringe were easy to deal with. Although they did not know the true relationship between Han Hao and Han Shuo, after some investigation, they knew that Han Hao and Han Shuo had a close relationship because the energy they used was very similar in some aspects. Just this alone was enough. Therefore, the 4 sovereigns had tacitly instructed their subordinates not to get into a conflict with Han Hao over Salus. Naturally, they weren't worried about Han Hao, who had recently shown off his abilities, but Han Shuo, who had forced Salus into hiding. Han Hao seemed to know what the 4 sovereigns were thinking. He would not deliberately provoke or get into a conflict with the subordinates of the 4 sovereigns. When he encountered Asora's subordinates, Han Hao would be very friendly and even share some of the profits with them. To Han Hao, although he wasn't in Tanai, he had long regarded the Pandemonium as his home. In any case, Asora had protected the Pandemonium. Not only did Han Shuo feel indebted to him, but even Han Hao, who had not entered the Pandemonium, had a favorable impression of Asora. He was willing to share some of the profits with Asora's subordinates. A year later, at the checkpoint of the Amphilas at the center of the Fringe, Han Shuo was leisurely walking towards the checkpoint. The checkpoint was guarded by one of Logue's subordinates. It was obvious that he did not recognize Han Shuo. When Han Shuo arrived, the guard coldly shouted, "Pay the black crystal coins!" Han Shuo looked at the guard with interest. His smile was as gentle as ever, but his words sounded rather arrogant. "My apologies, but I will not pay a single black crystal coin in Tanai in the future. Upon hearing those words, the mid-stage high god who cultivated in the energy of water put on a cold face. With a wave of his hand, a group of divine guards surrounded Han Sho with malicious intentions. "Do you have a death wish?" shouted the guard coldly and blocked Han Sho's path. It seemed that he was ready to attack Han Sho. "Let Logue come and collect black crystal coins from me." "You people are not qualified to do so," replied Han Sho with the same smile on his face. He was not the least bit enraged. He merely felt that these guards were indeed discerning. "You are courting death. How dare you address Lord Logue by his name?" The guard's face jolted. He shouted, "I don't care who he is, kill him! He has not entered the Omphalos, so he is not breaking the rules." It was obvious that these subordinates of Logue did not recognize Han Sho. They did not treat Han Sho as a big shot. In their minds, anyone who entered the Omphalos would have to pay black crystal coins, except for the 5 sovereigns. These people knew the 5 sovereigns very well, and they did not think much of it. All they wanted was to protect the dignity of Sovereign Logue. "You people are really courting death. You should know that the fringe is no longer the same as before. Other than the 5 sovereigns, there is another person that you absolutely cannot afford to offend. Even if Logue were to come personally, I think he would still let Brian enter the Omphalos courteously." At this moment, a chuckle came from the Omphalos as Haralai slowly walked out. Logue's subordinates did not know who Han Sho was, but they knew that Haralai was a well-known leader in the fringe. The leader was rather surprised to hear Han Sho's words. Then, he suddenly recalled someone and his face turned pale. He looked at Han Sho in awe and asked, "Are you Mr. Brian?" Han Sho smiled and did not answer his question. Instead, he asked, "I would like to know if you still dare to accept my black crystal coins." "Of course not." The guard's face was filled with fear. He hastily explained, "Our Lord has instructed that you are free to do whatever you want in the fringe. Our Lord will not interfere." Han Sho chuckled and nodded. He said, "That's good then." After that, he leisurely walked into the Omphalos without even looking at the guard. Logue's subordinates stepped aside to make way for him. Their movements were respectful and their faces were filled with awe. You're tuning in to the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.